Chapter 467. Yi Hongyu said, "You can't keep people in the snow, so you want to keep people here?" Ning Ke said, "I don't understand what you mean." Yi Hongyu asked, "Why did you dismiss all the stewards and maids last night?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "Doesn't this prove that I didn't keep anyone here?" Yi Hongyu said, "You know what I mean." Ning Ke said, "Today is the winter solstice. The stewards and maids should spend more time with their families." Yi Hongyu said, "Then why do you want me to leave? Don't tell me that you haven't given up on assassinating Xiaohou. You are going to do it now." Ning Ke asked, "Are you worried about my life?" Yi Hongyu shook her head. Ning Ke said with a smile, "Although it sounds sad, this is the real you. Since you are not worried about my life, why do you care what I do? Xiaohou is a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism. My brother came to Chang'an for this. He will not allow you to ruin it, and neither will I. So if you want to do it, I will keep you here." Yi Hongyu looked at him and said calmly. Her right hand was about to hold a virtual sword in the winter wind. Ning Ke looked at her right hand and said after a long silence, "It seems that everyone in the world, including my sect, does not agree with me assassinating Xiaohou." He raised his head and looked into Yi Hongyu's eyes quietly. He said, "You know what kind of person I am. I can't defeat Xiaohou, so I won't think about killing him. I want you to leave because I want to tell you that Yi Su's Taoist temple is reopening today. Since it's the winter solstice, you should go there." Yi Hongyu said, "You haven't said whether you are going to assassinate Xiaohou." Ning Ke said, "I swear on the headmaster's character that I have never thought about assassinating Xiaohou." Yi Hongyu's expression did not change. She said, "Change your name." Ning Ke said, "If I assassinate Xiaohou, then Sang Sang and I can never be together." Yi Hongyu was startled. She did not expect him to make such a promise. She frowned and asked, "Then why do you two care so much about today?" Ning Ke said, "We are going to the House of Red Sleeves to eat haggis soup." Yi Hongyu was silent. Her green robe fluttered slightly and she disappeared into the depths of the plum tree. The big black horse chewed on the fragrant plum blossoms and left Yinming Lake, running out of the city. The soldiers stationed at the south gate of Chang'an City had already been warned by the Fish Dragon Gang and knew the origin of the black horse. They did not stop it and just watched it disappear on the cold winter road outside the city. It didn't take long for the big black horse to run back to the academy. It stepped on the slope from the side door and entered the clouds. It appeared by the mirror lake on the cliff plateau of the back mountain. It kept panting and lowered its head to kiss itself on the surface of the lake. It drank the water greedily to moisten its throat and lungs that were about to burn. The big black horse did not know what Ning Ke was going to do, nor did he know why he felt so uneasy. He just vaguely felt that he should return to the academy earlier so that the people in the academy could guess what was going to happen at Yinming Lake. He thought that he was the messenger. Chun Pippi stood on the other side of the lake and looked at the big black horse on the other side. His round cheeks were filled with deep worry. Tang Xiaoting looked up at him and asked, "Will something happen?" According to younger brother's character, he would not make any decision if he knew that he would lose. So nothing should happen. But why did the big black horse come back? Chun Pippi frowned slightly and said, "Now I realize that I don't seem to understand what he's thinking. I always thought that he was a cold, emotionless, and realistic guy, so it's hard for me to imagine that he would do something brave and arrogant." Tang Xiaoting said, "Ning Ke is a very shameless person. But my brother told me before I came to the academy that some people can be extremely shameless. In fact, it actually takes a lot of courage." Chun Pippi said after a moment of silence, "I want to go to Chang'an City." Tang Xiaoting said, "I will go with you." Chun Pippi shook his head and said, "Third sister will not agree. Teacher gave me a break in the morning when I was doing morning lessons." Tang Xiaoting looked at Chun Pippi and said seriously, "Xiaohou is the biggest traitor of the Enlightenment doctrine in the past 1,000 years. My brother has always wanted to kill him, and so do I. But it is a pity that I do not have the ability to do so. Since youngest uncle wants to kill him today, at least I have to watch from the side. The atmosphere in the palace was very calm. There was the sound of ceremonial music and warm fragrance. The palace maids and eunuchs walked in the hall with smiles on their faces. No one looked at the legendary cruel and cold-blooded General Xiaoho, and no one noticed the strange expression on His Majesty's face. His Majesty looked at Xiaoho below and said indifferently, "Since the matter has been resolved, don't make any more changes. I don't care about the relationship between Ning Ke and the Xianwei general, and I don't want to know about the recent murder cases in Chang'an City. After all, he is a student of the headmaster of academy. It will be difficult for you to meet him when you leave Chang'an City today. Since it is difficult to meet him, let's not make things difficult for each other." Xiaoho left his seat and knelt down, calmly agreeing. His Majesty put his hands behind his back and silently left the side hall, ending the Emperor's banquet for returning officials in advance. All the eunuchs and palace maids in the hall also left with him, leaving the side hall to the Empress and General Xiaoho, who had been quietly waiting by the side. According to the rules, it was very inappropriate for the Empress to be alone with a general of the Empire. However, this was His Majesty's order, and no one dared to object. The Empress quietly looked at her brother below and sighed softly. She said, "Will he be all right?" Xiaoho looked at her, and on his usual dark and indifferent face, there was a very rare warm and pampering smile. He said, "We are going back to our hometown. Nothing will happen. I feel relaxed like never before. Sister, you will be alone in Chang'an City from now on. You must be careful. If anything goes wrong, inform me as soon as possible." The Empress smiled and said, "Judging from the movements in the academy, it should be peaceful. This was originally the agreement between Mr. First and me. I think the headmaster of the academy also has the same attitude. As for Ning Ke, we all know what kind of person he is. Of course, it will be peaceful." Xiaoho frowned slightly and forcibly suppressed the increasingly irritating cough in his chest. He did not want to let his sister worry about him after leaving Chang'an. The Empress silently looked at his face. Her gentle gaze seemed to be able to penetrate deep into his body. She looked at the injury in his lungs and faintly said, "In the wilderness, Tang caused you such a serious injury. I think he must not have had a good time. Why didn't you take the opportunity to kill him at that time?" Xiaoho coughed softly and said, "He can hurt me and I can hurt him. It is all natural. However, if I want to kill him, I need to sacrifice more lives. Those cavalries in the wilderness are all loyal subordinates who have followed me for many years. Why should I let them exchange their lives?" Hearing this, the Empress's expression became more and more gentle. She comforted him and said, "Brother, you have changed a lot. Not as cold, violent, and murderous as before?" Xiaoho laughed at himself. He thought that when he and his sister left the wilderness and came to the Tang Empire, they did not have any background. His Majesty had not yet ascended the throne, and she was not the Empress. What else could they do if they wanted to gain a foothold in such a big empire but to make all their enemies feel terrified? It was winter. Snow fell from the sky like powder, coating the red walls of the palace with a thin layer of powder. The square in front of the side hall was covered with snow, as if it would not stop. Xiaoho silently looked at the cold snow outside the hall. He could not help but think of the snow-like ashes on his hands after he snatched the iron box from Ning Ke in the north of the Hulun Sea. Then, he seemed to hear some whimpering sounds in the deepest part of the wind and snow. It was not the whistling of the north wind, but the chirping of cicadas. He knew it was an auditory hallucination, but his face still became a little ugly. Decades ago, he left Tianqi Mountain and went south to the Tang Empire. He was full of pride and arrogance. However, when he decided to betray the Enlightenment doctrine and cook Murong Linshuang to death, his pride and anger had long disappeared. For so many years, he had only covered it with violence and cruelty. Because from that day on, he was a traitor of the devil's doctrine. From that day on, there had been two extremely cold dark clouds in the depths of his heart that could not be driven away. One of the dark clouds was his teacher, Master Lotus. The other was the current suzerain of the devil's doctrine, 23-year cicada cultivation. Xiaoho was very powerful and confident, but he was very clear that once the two dark clouds floated over, he would have no way out except death. When Kuharan destroyed the front gate of the devil's doctrine with a single sword, he did not see Master Lotus die with his own eyes. He could not believe that a person like his teacher would die so quietly. The current suzerain of the devil's doctrine cultivated 23-year cicada cultivation and hid in the world. He was known as the most mysterious person in the cultivation world. Although it was said that he had died long ago, Xiaoho did not dare to believe it. Therefore, he had been living in fear all these years. In the north of the Hulun Sea, Xiaoho snatched the iron box from Ning Kei's hands. In the box was not the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane, but the ashes of his teacher, Lotus. He was a little disappointed, then sad, and then relieved. It was probably at that moment that he really had the idea to retire and stop caring about the world. I don't know what adventure Ning Kei had after entering the front gate. Xiaoho looked at the dancing snowflakes outside the hall and said with a complicated expression, "Since the ashes of my teacher appeared in his hands, he might have inherited something. And suzerain, I don't know where he is hiding now. Although he certainly does not dare to stay in Chang, and there is nowhere in the world that he cannot go." The Empress was very clear about what her brother's biggest fear was. She walked to his side and softly comforted him, "But Master Lotus is dead after all. The 23-year cicada cultivation that the suzerain cultivated is the world's most perverted and dangerous cultivation method. All these years, neither the Haotian Taoism nor the Academy could find any trace of him. I'm afraid that he is already dead. If he is still alive, why did he not come to you for so many years?" "I hope so," Xiaoho said. "Yi Su of the Haotian Taoism came to Chang and the people of the Buddhism sect will also come. Now that I think about it, among the 3 sects in the world, only the devil's doctrine has withered like this. I can't help but feel a little sad. There are more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 468. Ning Kei didn't lie to Yi Hongyu. He really took Sang Sang to the House of Red Sleeves, but he didn't hang around in Dewdrop's yard, nor did he peep at the new red cards. Instead, he went to the top floor and sat in Mistress Jian's room. He rolled up his sleeves and started to attack the pot of mutton giblets soup. The mutton giblets soup was made with excellent utensils, and there were more than 10 plates of side dishes and vegetables. The steam was steaming and green. It was a wonderful atmosphere for the winter solstice. Ning Kei picked up a chopstick from the bowl, dipped it in the minced garlic, and put it into his mouth to chew. He put the 9 River double-distilled liquor into his mouth. It was so spicy that he frowned, as if he had encountered a very difficult problem. Mistress Jian took the towel from Xiao Chao and wiped the sweat on her forehead. She looked at him and said, "I've brought the Empress's words. As long as you can spend today peacefully, the Empress is willing to pay any price you need. Of course, she will apologize to you again on behalf of Xiao." Ning Kei pointed at his wrinkled brows because of the spiciness of the liquor and said, "The problem is that there is a knot between my brows that can't be stretched. I can't think it through. That's because of the spiciness of the liquor. You can't drink as well as Sang Sang, so don't drink hard liquor." Mistress Jian's words seemed to have a hidden meaning. After saying this, she was silent for a long time, and then cautiously and gently persuaded him again. Great wisdom is to be able to endure and be calm. Ning Kei nodded and said, "I understand." Mistress Jian comforted him with a smile and then sighed and said, "Before you came, I was really worried that you would mess around like that guy in the past. According to the senior brothers in the academy, Mistress Jian should be youngest uncle's sister-in-law. In this case, she was the only one in the world who dared to call youngest uncle that guy. "I'm not as capable as youngest uncle," he said with a smile, and then his smile gradually disappeared. He said, "If I were as capable as youngest uncle, I wouldn't have to endure any more. Since I've entered the human realm, I must kill well. I can't let Master's prestige or youngest uncle's name be tarnished." Mistress Jian frowned and said, "Entering the human realm is not to kill, but to understand." Ning Ke said, "Isn't killing also a kind of enlightenment?" After saying this, Ning Ke became drunk. It was unknown whether it was the double-distilled liquor from Hebei County that made him drunk, or he found that he was unable to tear apart the dense net of the powerhouses in Chang, and so he had to get drunk. Perhaps he just wanted to use the drunkenness to hide some of his thoughts. As usual, after getting drunk at the House of Red Sleeves, he slept in Dewdrop's courtyard. The bed was still warm and fragrant. Fortunately, there was not much of the smell of Yen Sei's stinky feet. Sang Sang sat at the head of the bed, took a wet towel and put it on his forehead. She knew very well that Ning Ke was pretending to be drunk, so she declined Dewdrop's suggestion to make soup to sober him up. Ning Ke did not dream in his tipsy state. He did not see the darkness in the distance, did not see the three extremely cold black smoke, and did not see the infinite light in the sky above his head. He just sank his consciousness into his sense of perception, all the way to the deepest bottom of the sea, and picked up those fragments of consciousness to feel them silently. These fragments of consciousness were obtained after the bloody battle with Lotus at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine last year. Before Master Lotus died, he forcibly transferred these fragments of consciousness into his sense of perception. Since then, he had been carefully feeling them, but he did not gain any concrete result. However, he knew that these fragments of consciousness were very important, at least to him. Because in the north of the Hulun Sea, it was with these fragments of consciousness that he instinctively made a very effective dodge when facing Xia Ho's mighty iron fist. He seemed to be able to guess Xia Ho's thoughts during the battle. Drunk and lying on the warm bed, Ning Ke's right hand unconsciously fell on his waist. There were a few hard things in his belt, the waist token of the academy, and some other waist tokens. These waist tokens in his belt seemed to give him some spiritual comfort, making his consciousness and his sense of perception become more and more peaceful and clear. At this time, he still did not have enough state to fully understand the deep meaning of the fragments of consciousness left by Master Lotus. However, he already understood how important these fragments of consciousness would be in the battle with Xia Ho. At the Yenming Lake, Yi Hongyu once said that grand cultivators who entered the knowing destiny state could sense the slightest changes in the qi of heaven and earth. All the means of their opponents could not surpass their experience and perception. This kind of battle consciousness was the most terrifying part of the knowing destiny state powerhouses. Ning Ke was now in the upper state of see-through. If he wanted to fight with a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state, the huge gap in battle consciousness alone would make him feel hopeless. However, there were many fragments of consciousness left by Lotus deep in his sense of perception. As the great divine priest of West Hill, the bigwig who was the protector of the front gate of the Buddhism sect, he had already reached the peak of the knowing destiny state when he was alive. If not for some very mysterious reasons, he would have already broken through the 5 states and become a divine transcendence. What kind of state did the fragments of consciousness left by Master Lotus reach? Ning Ke did not know. This kind of thing could only be found out in the battle. After waking up, Ning Ke felt refreshed and sober. After confirming that his body and spirit were in the best state of his life, he left the House of Red Sleeves with Sang Sang. The wind and snow in Chang were heavier than in the morning. Like goose feathers, they danced restlessly and then fell, dyeing the whole city white. Holding the dirty big black umbrella, Ning Ke and Sang Sang walked in this plain world of ice and snow, like a dazzling drop of ink. The common people in the city were celebrating the festival. Accompanied by the mellow smell of mutton giblet soup, the thick snow on the eaves seemed to have become freshly cooked mutton slices. The nobles also celebrated the festival. However, there was no noise coming from the quiet and solemn mansions in the North City. Ning Ke knew why. The officials in the mansions were all going to the imperial city to see Xia Ho off. They might even send the general out of Chang'an. He held the handle of the big black umbrella in his right hand and held Song Song's hand in his left. They walked in the wind and snow, in the beautiful atmosphere of the marketplace and the noble atmosphere of the North City. He was silent. In the summer of the 15th year of Tianqi era, Chang'an had been peaceful for a long time. The people in the city, including the senior brothers and sisters in the academy, probably thought that the peace would continue. They all thought that Ning Ke had given up the idea. No matter how they looked at it, they could not find a suitable way for him. It was impossible for Ning Ke to give up. Just like what he had said to Sang Sang in the summer, if he did not kill Xia Ho would really be old. Revenge itself was not important. What was important was that he had to give an account of his life. Without this account, his life would not be complete. He might die because Xia Ho was indeed very powerful. In the wilderness, even eldest brother said that he was not sure that he could kill Xia Ho. But he did not think that he would die. Except for the headmaster of academy, no one in the world knew better than him that he was very powerful now. Life was like a puzzle. Ning Ke had solved many puzzles in the past 15 years. The purpose of solving the puzzles was today's battle, and he firmly believed that he would win. The imperial city was shrouded in heavy snow. The red palace wall was particularly eye-catching in the snow. The atmosphere in front of the imperial city was different from the cold wind and snow. Dozens of luxurious horse carriages were waiting outside the square in front of the palace. A few hundred feet ahead of the jade fence of the moat was the palace gate. There were many people there. Princely Peiyan came. The Defender General of the State Su Shi, the Grand Secretary and the ministers came. Except for the Prime Minister who was recuperating from illness, all the bigwigs of the imperial court and the military of the Tang Empire appeared in front of the imperial city. They were here to see off General Xia Ho. Looking at the tall figure slowly walking out of the gate of the imperial city, the bigwigs' faces showed complicated emotions. Some smiled comfortingly, some sighed and some were sad. This was the first general of the Tang Empire to retire in the Tianqi era. Looking back more than 100 years, he was probably the only general who had given up his military power without any reason. Xia Ho slowly walked out of the gate. Looking at the bigwigs and colleagues who had been with him for decades, his solemn face was also very complicated. Leaving the imperial palace and going to his hometown, he was no longer a general, but a farmer retiring in old age. He was indeed a little reluctant. He was reluctant to give up the power to hold a killing knife in his hand. He was reluctant to give up the iron cavalry in the military camp. He was reluctant to give up the days of watching swords by lantern at night. What was most reluctant was that the law of the Tang Empire could not shake him, the enemy's army could not defeat him, and even the West Hill Divine Palace quietly indulged him. But he was forced to leave this prosperous stage. However, since the founding of the Tang Empire, there were not many ministers who could receive such an honor. Not to mention that a traitor of the Devil's Doctrine could become a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism, a general of the Tang Empire, expand the territory, kill countless people, and retire peacefully. This was a very perfect life. Xia Ho was very satisfied. In the quiet city gate, he walked out of the palace and walked toward the bigwigs who were looking at him with a smile. With every step he took, his whole body relaxed a little. Walking out of the city gate, his military boots squeaked on the snow. Xia Ho frowned slightly. He did not return the salute to the prince who personally welcomed him, but looked to the south of the imperial palace. The prince's expression changed slightly and he turned to look. The people at the palace gate all found something strange and turned to look in that direction in confusion. Old General Su Shi suddenly coughed painfully. In the sky full of snow, his white eyebrows looked like two pieces of sticky snow that refused to fall. He was a little angry, but also a little helpless. In the sky full of snow, a big black umbrella slowly walked over. There were two people under the black umbrella. The black umbrella was very big and its surface was very thick. No matter how strong the wind and snow were, it could not invade it. The heavy snow fell on the oily surface of the black umbrella, but did not stick to it. Instead, it seemed to be a little afraid and slid to the sides. Looking at the big black umbrella slowly in the snow, Xiahou did not know why he felt completely relaxed. It was not until this moment that he realized that he had actually been waiting for the arrival of this person. The traditional version has been published. Today I received the sample book. I like it very much. Thank you to the students of the publishing house. My friends from Taiwan, I wonder if you have seen it. In addition, about understanding this song, the singer of China voice did not sing my favorite song. I still like the version with Yang Zhongwei's broken voice the most. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 469. In the wind and snow, the big black umbrella slowly came to the palace gate and stopped in front of the Tang civil and military officials. Then it closed, revealing Ning Ke and Sang Sang under the umbrella. It was dead silent in front of the imperial city. Only the sound of the cold wind blowing the snow, the sound of the snow falling on the ice of the moat, and people's own breathing could be heard. These bigwigs looked at Ning Ke and frowned at the same time. They seemed to be very confused about what Mr. 13 of the Academy wanted to do on the day General Xiahou left the capital. Their complicated expressions and confusion were actually cover-up. They all knew about the rumor and knew that the military had investigated Ning Ke's connection with the murder cases, so they could guess his intention. But from summer to autumn and then to winter, Chang'an had been peaceful for a long time. When the whole world thought that Ning Ke had given up, he really appeared. In the silence, everyone looked at Ning Ke with vigilance and uneasiness. Xing Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, looked at Sang Sang beside Ning Ke with a worried expression. Princely Peiyan slowly took a step forward and looked at Ning Ke with hidden anger. He said, "What do you want to do?" General Su Shi looked at Ning Ke expressionlessly and said, "If you want to assassinate a general of the Tang Empire in front of all the civil and military officials, I will admire your courage and stupidity." The snow continued to fall toward the imperial city. Ning Ke brushed off the thick snow on his shoulder and said, "Even if I have the courage, I will not be so stupid. But since I am here, I have to do something." Su Shi said lightly and sarcastically, "What can you do in front of the law of the Tang Empire?" The change in front of the imperial city gate had alarmed the Yulin royal guards and the imperial bodyguards. The chief eunuch who had sent General Xiahou to the exit had already run into the palace as fast as he could to inform His Majesty of the news. Many imperial court subordinates came from the square and walked behind the adult. They opened umbrellas to shelter them from the wind and snow. In front of the red wall, flowers of different colors suddenly bloomed. Ning Ke's big black umbrella had been put away and was held in Sang Sang's hand. The master and handmaiden stood in the wind and snow calmly, looking at the more and more umbrellas in front of them. The shadows of the umbrellas shrouded the faces of the adult. No one could see the emotions on their faces, nor could they see the thoughts in their eyes. Ning Ke looked at Su Shi and said calmly, "The law of the Tang Empire comes first. This is the iron rule of the Academy. As a disciple of the Academy and a student of the headmaster of the Academy, I will certainly abide by it. Therefore, I think it is extremely absurd that the military is investigating whether I am a suspect in those murders." Su Shi frowned slightly and said, "There are so many old officials of the imperial court standing in the wind and snow talking to you. Do you think they want to hear you clear your name?" Ning Ke did not pay any more attention to the military leader of the Tang Empire. He turned to look at Xiahou and said, "Many people are guessing what I will do. I believe you have been guessing too. In fact, from the day I decided to kill you, I have been guessing what I will do. Indeed, the most important bigwigs of the Tang Empire in front of the imperial city had been guessing what Ning Ke would do. Even when they saw him at this time, they did not know what he was going to do. Ning Ke looked at Xia Ho and said seriously, "It was not until autumn that I finally understood what I should do. I want to challenge you." His voice was not very clear in the howling wind and snow. However, the content of this sentence was clearly passed through the wind and snow and into everyone's ears. The voice gradually disappeared from the vermilion palace wall. A thin piece of paper floated out of Ning Ke's sleeve. Ignoring the heavy snow falling from the sky, it slowly and steadily floated in front of Xia Ho. No matter how strong the wind in front of the imperial city and how heavy the snow was, it seemed to have no effect on this thin piece of paper. Xia Ho silently looked at Ning Ke, who was not far away. He looked at the white paper that seemed to be pulled by countless strings and slowly floated towards him. There was no emotion on his face that was covered by the shadow of the umbrella. He raised his right hand and grabbed the thin piece of paper that floated in front of him. It was a letter of challenge. From the moment Ning Ke said that he wanted to challenge Xia Ho, it became even quieter in front of the imperial city. Even the sound of the wind and snow seemed to have disappeared. His words echoed in everyone's ears, and everyone's eyes were fixed on the thin piece of paper that was moving forward slowly and firmly in the wind and snow. Ning Ke wanted to challenge General Xia Ho head-on? Everyone thought that they had misheard, because in their opinion, this was something that would never happen. People in the imperial court certainly knew that Ning Ke was the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy and had learned talisman Taoism from Master Yen Sei. In less than 2 years of cultivation, he had already become a powerhouse in the see-through state. The upper see-through state was almost like an immortal in the eyes of mortals. However, decades ago, General Xia Ho was already a powerhouse in the peak state of martial arts and one of the most powerful men in the world. What qualifications did Ning Ke have to challenge Xia Ho? This was like a flower challenging a forest, a mantis challenging a horse carriage, an egg challenging a stone mountain, and a beggar challenging the great emperor. General Su Shi silently thought that Ning Ke was probably really driven crazy. If he was not crazy, how could he do such a crazy thing? Prince Li Peiyan's face was a little stiff, but in an instant, it became gentle again. He felt that he had probably guessed Ning Ke's thought. Ning Ke's father's death was absolutely irreconcilable, and he could not go against the will of the academy and the law of the Tang Empire. So he came to challenge Xiao. Even if he lost, it would be considered an explanation. After the shock, people in front of the imperial city came up with 2 different ideas. If Ning Ke was not crazy, then he was only challenging General Xia Ho for spiritual comfort. Looking at Ning Ke, who was bathed in the wind and snow, and his calm expression, bigwigs did not think that he was really crazy. Then they thought that there should not be anything too bloody next. Ning Ke could not defeat General Xiao. Even if General Xia Ho won this duel, he could not really kill Mr. 13 for the sake of the academy and the headmaster of the academy. Yes, things should be like this. However, what happened next directly destroyed all their imaginations and expectations. Ning Ke took a small knife from Song Song's hand and used the blade to stab his left palm. Then he began to move. The blade moved very slowly on his palm, and the sharp blade slowly cut a long wound. Blood began to ooze out, and the slightly white skin was instantly dyed red. There were exclamations and gasps in front of the imperial city. People looked at the blade cutting slowly on his palm, as if the sharp tip of the knife was cutting their own bodies, and it was extremely painful. Ning Ke was not affected by these exclamations. His expression was calm and very focused, as if he was not cutting his palm, but carving a flower in his palm. Ning Ke, you are crazy. Xing Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, could no longer keep silent. He anxiously walked out of the crowd and looked at Sang Sang, yelling, "Hurry up and stop him! Sang Sang lowered her head and looked at her boots stepping in the snow. The prince's face suddenly became abnormally pale. General Su Shi's fluttering snow-white eyebrows suddenly dropped, as if he could not bear a heavy burden. Everyone in front of the imperial city looked extremely shocked. Only Xiahou remained expressionless and silent. He calmly and attentively watched Ning Ke cut his palm, and the two iron eyebrows in the shadow slowly raised. What shocked and even astonished the crowd was not the pain that Ning Ke might bring by cutting his palm, but the meaning of his action. The Tangs worshipped martial arts, and their temperament was simple and direct. If they did not agree with each other, they would often punch each other. Duels became the most common scene in Chang'an. On that spring night 2 years ago, Ning Ke and Sang Sang returned from the city of Wei to Chang, and saw a duel on the street that night. At that time, he explained to the little handmaiden beside him that the rule of duels in Chang was that cutting one's sleeve represented a challenge, and that it was called a live game. As long as there was a winner, it would be fine. However, if the challenger cut his left palm, it meant that the duel was a dead game. At this time, in the snow of the imperial city, Ning Ke slowly cut his left palm, which meant that the challenge he issued to Xiahou today was not a spiritual comfort as people had previously thought, but a dead game of life and death. Although the civil and military officials present were of high status and could not be challenged, they all lived in Chang and knew this extremely well-known rule. So they were shocked and even pale. In their view, General Xiahou would definitely win today's challenge. However, if it was a dead game and Ning Ke died, with his identity as a core disciple of the headmaster of academy, it would still have a terrible impact on the imperial court of the Tang Empire. Li Peiyan stared at Ning Ke with a pale face and said, "Are you going to use your life in exchange for the headmaster's anger? Is it worth it? And what kind of person is the headmaster? How can he be used by you?" The blade had already cut the base of his palm. Ning Ke stopped moving and raised his head. His expression was still so calm, as if the pain in his palm did not affect him at all. He looked at the prince and said, "What does this have to do with your highness? Are you afraid that I will challenge you next?" Su Shi looked at him and said expressionlessly, "A duel of life and death requires the approval of the government. I can tell you that no one in the imperial court of the Tang Empire dares to approve this duel. When Daosher monk came to challenge me, it was approved by the military ministry. When Lu Yiqing challenged me, it was also approved by the military ministry. Today, I challenge General Xiahou. Does the military ministry not approve?" Ning Ke looked at him and asked seriously, "Does the Tang Empire's military have any shame?" Su Shi frowned slightly and did not speak. Ning Ke looked at everyone in front of the imperial city and said, "You all say that the law of the Tang Empire is the first. Fine, I will challenge according to the law of the Tang Empire. I want to know who can stop me?" Then he looked at Xiahou and said, "Unless you don't accept it." Xiahou slowly stroked the thin letter of challenge between his fingers. His expression was a little strange. He looked at him and said, "Your choice is indeed beyond my expectation." Ning Ke said, "I have never taken the ordinary path." Xiahou lightly flicked the thin paper in his hand and said, "When I saw this paper moving slowly in the wind and snow, I knew that your psyche power is very sensitive. It is a pity that your snow mountain and ocean of qi are blocked, and your control of the qi of heaven and earth is extremely bad, even worse than the see-through state that you should have. You are so bad, and yet you want to challenge me. I can only say that you have embarked on a dead end." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "I have no other path to take, so I have to take this path. As for whether it is a dead end, I will know when I reach the end." Xiahou said, "For you, challenging me head-on is the worst choice." Ning Ke said, "Since it is the only choice, then it is the best choice. Ning Ke's choice was decided when I started the book. It was decided on the night he and Sang Sang entered Chang'an. It was really the only choice and the best choice. But he is not Su Lu. He doesn't know the concept of bravery. It's just a decision made after careful consideration and helplessness. I am here to report that there is still some time before I kill Xiao. This is just a bone, and I have other things to write. It is meat, very important, and there is more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 470. Xiaoho smiled and slowly walked out of the umbrella held by his subordinate. He walked into the wind and snow and his smile suddenly disappeared. He looked at Ning Ke coldly and said, "Is this the Academy's choice?" Ning Ke also smiled and said, "You don't have to be afraid. This is my own choice. It has nothing to do with the Academy." Xiaoho said indifferently, "If you want to die, then you will die." Ning Ke said, "I don't want to die. I only want you to die." Xiaoho looked at him and said after a long silence, "You are a madman." Ning Ke replied, 15 years ago I escaped from Chang'an. I used the determination and willpower to die to survive. It was just to go crazy. Is it not worth it?" Xiaoho was silent for a moment and said, "It is indeed worth it." The idea of returning good for evil had never been popular in the Tang Empire. People living in this land were used to being simple and direct. If you want to beat me, I will beat you. If you want to kill me, I will kill you. If you kill my father, I will kill your father and you. Therefore, everyone felt that it was reasonable for Ning Ke to invite Xiaoho to a duel to the death. Through the Academy, the imperial court had promised to cut off the past and let Xiaoho retire. It was because they did not want the complications of the past to affect the future of the empire. They did not want the West Hill Divine Palace to meddle in Chang'an. If Ning Ke wanted to use tricks to deal with Xiaoho, it would affect the process of metabolism. But today, he chose the simplest, or perhaps the stupidest, method. It would not leave any repercussions. Because if the environment was fair, then the duel must be fair. Fairness did not mean there were no problems. Everyone thought that Ning Ke was courting death by challenging General Xiaoho. No one wanted to see Ning Ke die because he was a disciple of the headmaster of the academy. But they could not stop this duel now and could only hope that Xiaoho would not accept Ning Ke's invitation. As a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, it was indeed very humiliating to refuse the challenge of a see-through realm. Therefore, the prince looked at Xiaoho with a faint pleading expression. Xiaoho didn't seem to notice the prince's gaze. He squinted and said, "Since you want to die in my hands." Right at this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard outside the palace gate. A few high-ranking eunuchs were desperately running towards the door. Their official robes were in a mess and they looked extremely battered and exhausted. In the cold wind and snow, they were so hot that their foreheads were covered with sweat. It seemed like they had run all the way out of the palace. Eunuch Lin, who was running at the very front of the group of eunuchs, heard Xiaoho's voice from a distance. A terrified expression appeared on his face. Like a goose whose throat had been grabbed, he shrieked in panic, "His Majesty has decreed that no one is to move." When the important figures of the outer palace heard this shout, their expressions suddenly relaxed. They thought that in this world, perhaps only the emperor could stop this challenge. However, Xiaoho didn't seem to hear the shrill voice coming from the palace gate behind him, nor did he hear the emperor's decree. With an indifferent expression, he continued, "Then I will fulfill your wish." After saying this, he took a knife from a bodyguard behind him. With a swish, he cut a large wound on his left palm. Compared to Ning Ke's slow cutting of his palm earlier, this movement was exceptionally simple and powerful. Xiaoho's face was expressionless. He slowly clenched his left hand into a fist. Thick blood flowed from the webbing between his thumb and index finger. Eunuch Lin had never run so fast or so hard in his life. When he ran out of the palace gate, panting, he saw Xiaoho's bleeding palm. His face immediately turned extremely pale. His legs gave way and he sat down in the snow. Princely Payan's face was as pale as snow. Su Shi's silver eyebrows were as calm as the snow on the willows by the lake. He looked at Xia Ho and said expressionlessly, "Withdraw it." Xia Ho shook his head and said indifferently, "He can withdraw it, but I can't. Because I have my pride." Hearing this, Ning Ke began to clap. His left palm was still bleeding. As he clapped, the blood scattered and splashed in all directions, landing on his black academy uniform and on the white snow on the ground. The scene looked extremely bloody. The clapping was also very bloody. The blood splashed, giving off a feeling that it was about to coagulate. Ning Ke said, "I am not disappointed. You are indeed still that arrogant and ruthless general. You are indeed arrogant to the point of stupidity. I hope that you will continue to be so arrogant." Xia Ho ignored his mockery and said expressionlessly, "When?" The date column on the thin challenge document was blank. Ning Ke said, "As long as it is before you leave Chang'an." Xia Ho said, "I am leaving today." Ning Ke said, "Then today it is." Xia Ho said, "Very good. I will set off after killing you. It shouldn't take too long." Ning Ke said, "Perhaps you won't set off again." Xia Ho was still expressionless. He said indifferently, "I will decide the time and you decide the location. I have prepared the location for a long time." Ning Ke said, "I have bought many houses by the Yanming Lake. I don't need to worry about hurting innocent people when I fight there. Besides, I have made some preparations there. After all, I am a talisman master and know a little about tactical arrays. My state is not as good as yours, so I want to take advantage of you in this aspect." When the two were talking, no one interrupted. They listened in shock and helplessness. Only when they heard the location Ning Ke had chosen did their expressions change. In fact, many bigwigs in Chang'an knew that Ning Ke had bought houses by the Yanming Lake. Bigwigs in the military like General Su Shi knew that Ning Ke had done something there. Therefore, they were not surprised that Ning Ke had chosen this place. They were only surprised that he would tell Xia Ho about it. Ning Ke looked at Xia Ho and said, "Do you mind?" Xia Ho said, "Since you are arrogant, even if you are stupid, you still have to be arrogant." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Arrogance kills." Xia Ho said, "If an eagle is not arrogant in front of an ant, it will be punished by God." "Enough. You are two crazy people." Princely Peiyin's face was pale and his eyes were full of fire. He looked at Xia Ho and scolded, "Have you ever thought about how you will explain it to the headmaster if you kill this person? How will the imperial court explain it to the headmaster? This king will use this crown to exchange for 2 hours of time." After saying this, he resolutely took off the crown on his head and put it on the snow between Ning Ke and Xia Ho. He looked back at the civil and military officials and said coldly, "What are you waiting for? Get to work." The officials of the imperial court came to their senses. With the help of their subordinates, they scattered as fast as they could to find a way to stop this duel. Grand Secretary Xingjing wanted to go to Ning Ke and persuade him, but when he saw his bleeding palms, he could only sigh and retreat to the back. Su Shi's eyelids drooped slightly. He seemed to be looking at Xia Ho and Ning Ke, and also at the wind and snow in the sky. He said indifferently, "It will happen in more than 10 years. Why do you care about waiting for 2 hours?" After saying this, he turned and left the palace gate. No one knew where he was going. In front of the gate of the Snow Palace, the officials of the imperial court left one by one. Only Grand Secretary Xingjing and a few other onlookers were left. In the silence, Xia Ho suddenly said, "Bring the flag." On the other side of the Jade Bridge in the distance, there was a guard of honor for the general's glorious return. Hundreds of people had been waiting for a long time. Hearing these 2 words, a bodyguard sprinted over and took a large flag from the guard of honor. Then, he stood solemnly behind General Xiao's army. The cold wind howled with the snow and immediately fluttered the large flag. It was the flag of the Tang Empire. It was blood-red, as if it was dyed with the blood of tens of thousands of enemies. It whistled and danced in the wind and snow. In front of the palace gate, it suddenly became very solemn. Ning Ke looked at the blood flag behind Xia Ho and his face that was reflected by the flag. He said, "It seems that you are really afraid to use the flag to help you." Xia Ho looked at the blood indifferently, with no other eyes. Ning Ke smiled and said, "Umbrella." With a bang, Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella again to block the falling snow above her head. In the wind and snow, a blood flag and a black umbrella faced each other. Mr. 13 of the Academy, Ning Ke, had issued a life-and-death challenge to General Xia Ho. This news spread to every mansion in Chang, and in the shortest time possible. No one thought that Ning Ke could win, so no one was willing to watch General Xia Ho kill him. Because no one knew what the headmaster of the Academy would do because of Ning Ke's death. The headmaster of the Academy had not spoken for many years and had even been forgotten by the common people. But for the bigwigs in the imperial court, it did not mean that the headmaster of the Academy's voice had lost its power. It was because every word he said was like a thunder above the clouds to the Tang Empire. This was a fair challenge initiated by Ning Quebec. Maybe even if Ning Ke died, the headmaster of the Academy would still abide by the law of the Tang Empire and remain silent. But no one dared to take such a risk, even if it was a small one. If the headmaster of the Academy was angry after Ning Ke's death, the entire Chang'an would probably be destroyed. When the nation master Li Qingshan appeared in front of the Cloud Gate Array, he had been thinking about these things. So when he heard the reply from Mr. First of the Academy, he was stunned for a long time. This is youngest brother's personal matter. The Academy will not stop him according to the rules of the Academy. Li Qingshan frowned and said, "But Ning Ke is seeking his own death." Eldest brother said gently, "Since he is seeking his own death, who can stop him?" Li Qingshan could not suppress the shock in his heart and said, "If Mr. 13 really dies in the hands of General Xia Ho, what will the Academy do?" Eldest brother smiled and said, "We will miss him." There was the Yulin Royal Guards in Chang'an. This powerful army was responsible for guarding the imperial city and possessed unimaginable power. It had powerful cultivators from the Imperial Center Administration and the Southern Gate Temple. Most importantly, it had strong willpower and determination. According to the law of the Tang Empire, the Yulin Royal Guards only listened to the orders of two people, the Tang Emperor and General Su Shi. Against the cold wind and snow, the Yulin Royal Guards began to form up and prepare to leave the camp. However, they had to stop in front of the Jade Bridge outside the camp because there was a person on the bridge. That person was wearing a tall hat and a robe. He sat cross-legged in the snow on the bridge with his head slightly lowered. Su Shi looked at the person on the bridge and could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. His voice burst out like thunder at the bridge and shook the flying snow. "Junmo, those who stand in our way will die." The person on the bridge was naturally second brother of the Academy. "Junmo, those who stand in our way will die." This has never been mentioned in the law of the Tang Empire. Second brother raised his head and looked at the military leader of the Tang Empire under the bridge. He said calmly, If you want me to die, you must die first." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 471. Except for Ji Haoran and Ning Ke, the two generations of people who had entered the human realm, the back of the mountain of the Academy had never entered the human realm. The soldiers of the Yulin Royal Guards on the other side of the bridge did not know who the man sitting cross-legged in the snow was. Hearing that this person actually dared to be so disrespectful to General Su Shi and be so arrogant, the Imperial Guards were instantly enraged to the extreme. Their beards and hairs stood on end as if they wanted to pierce through the armor on their bodies, and they drew their swords and spears with the intention of charging onto the snow bridge and beheading that bastard on the spot. Su Shi raised his right arm expressionlessly, and the commotion and killing intent behind him immediately subsided. He looked at the man sitting cross-legged in the snow and became serious. He said, "Is the academy really going to go back on its words?" Second brother looked at him under the bridge and said, "The academy does not object to Xiaoho's retirement, nor does it object to youngest brother's challenge. Because there is no way to object." Su Shi frowned and said, "You know I'm going to object to this." Second brother said, "I object to your objection." Su Shi looked at the man on the bridge. After a long silence, he asked in a hoarse voice, "Is this the headmaster's idea?" Second brother said, "No, it's my idea." Su Shi squinted and said, "That's why you are standing on the bridge." Second brother sat cross-legged in the snow, tall and straight. His robe did not tremble in the wind. He looked like a pine tree in the snow peak, very much like the great figure of the academy. He looked at Su Shi and the cavalry of the Yulin royal guards under the bridge and said expressionlessly, "I respect youngest brother, so I will not interfere. But I want him to be fair." In the imperial study of the palace, angry curses, fierce arguments, idiots, and all kinds of filthy words kept ringing. They were like snowflakes dancing in the sky, spreading everywhere. Nation Master Li Qinshan left the academy and entered Chang, and as fast as he could. He came to the newly renovated small Taoist temple. Because of the heavy snow, the neighborhood celebration had ended hastily. Yi Su smiled after hearing what happened in the imperial city and disappeared in the wind and snow. Many horse carriages came from the streets outside the imperial city. All the forces who had received the news had sent people to inquire about it, including the envoys of various countries and the representatives of the West Hill Divine Palace. In a pavilion far away from the moat, Yi Hongyu, who was dressed in a green Taoist robe, looked in the direction of the palace gate. She looked at the blood flag and the dazzling big black umbrella that were fluttering in the wind and snow. She remained silent. Chen Pippi brought Tang Xiaotang from the other end of the snowy street. Because of Tang Xiaotang's status, he did not let her follow him to the imperial palace. He turned around and knocked on the tightly closed door of a shop on the South Street. He borrowed a chair from that shop and then moved his round body from the snowy street to the foot of the imperial city. He looked at Ning Kai and said, "Before preparing to fight, you have to conserve your strength." Ning Kai replied, "Thank you, senior brother." A personal guard had already brought a table and a chair for Xiaoho, and even a cup of hot tea. In front of the blood flag, amidst the wind and snow, he held the teacup and casually drank, his expression naturally calm. Seeing Chen Pippi, Xiaoho frowned slightly, but did not pay much attention to him. Ning Kai sat on the chair, and Sang Sang held the big black umbrella behind the chair. Chen Pippi wanted to bandage his bleeding left palm, but Ning Kai shook his head and refused. In front of the palace gate, the blood flag and the black umbrella were in the wind and snow. The general was drinking hot tea, and Ning Kai was resting. This scene was very strange, even a little absurd, but also very scary. Many horse carriages were hidden in the streets in front of the imperial city, and many people had not arrived at the scene. They were waiting for the final result in their respective mansions. Mr. Second's appearance on the snow bridge is equivalent to the Academy's attitude. The Academy agrees that Ning Kai will challenge Xiaoho, so the Tang military cannot stop this. The third Minister of Offerings from Qinghe County withdrew his gaze from the falling snow in front of the balcony of the Princess Mansion. He looked at the two noble royal siblings and said with a smile, "Congratulations, Your Highness." Li Yu's expression was very calm, but there was a hidden worry in the depths of her eyes. Xiaoho was the Empress's most powerful helper. It was a good thing for her and Li Huiyuan that he retired. It was even better for Ning Kai to challenge Xiaoho. No matter who won or lost, even if the Academy kept silent about it, they would still hate the Empress's side. However, she could not be happy, because she, like everyone else in the world, believed that Ning Kai could not defeat Xiaoho. In other words, Ning Kai would definitely die today. She looked at He Mingqi, who had been sitting silently on the other side, and slightly frowned. She asked, What did Mr. Yi Su say about the nation master going to the small Taoist temple? He Mingqi shook his head and said, even if the West Hill Divine Palace wants to stop this in Chang, and it is impossible, because the Academy has already agreed. The third Minister of Offerings said lightly, if your Highness is still worried, I may have some means to make the West Hill Divine Palace and the Academy hate each other because of this matter. Hearing this, Li Yu's expression gradually turned cold. She slightly narrowed her eyes and warned, don't try to use any means to provoke the Academy's anger. Neither you nor I can bear it. The third Minister of Offerings was usually respected in Qinghe Prefecture like an ancestor. In front of the princess of the Tang Empire, he could consider himself inferior. However, after hearing this, he still felt a little embarrassed. Your Highness is right. Then I will go and have a look, he said expressionlessly. He gently flicked his sleeves and walked out of the balcony. Facing the wind and snow, he left the princess mansion and walked towards the Yanming Lake. The snow kept falling, and it was getting heavier and heavier, falling on Chang, and no matter how light the snow was, it would eventually fall on the ground, or be swept into the gutters, or accumulate until the next year. When the flowers bloomed in spring, it would be melted by the sun, mixed with dust and withered leaves, and disappear without a trace. This was the truth of heaven and earth. Just as what should be done had to be done, people who should come would come. Many people came to Chang, unaccompanied by the wind and snow, including a monk. The monk was wearing a worn-out bamboo hat and a tattered kapok kasaya. His face, which was exposed under the shadow of the bamboo hat, was ordinary, but it had a natural sense of determination. The monk entered the city through the west gate and stood on the snowy long street. It seemed that he did not know where to go. He turned to a porridge shop, took off his bamboo hat and began to ask for directions. He took off his bamboo hat, revealing a head full of sharp green and black hair. He looked as determined as the monk. However, when he asked for directions, the smile on his face was so kind and gentle. It was not accurate to use the word, asking for directions. The monk kept his mouth tightly shut, and when he occasionally grinned, only half of his tongue was left. It turned out that he was a mute who could not speak. For Ning Ke and Xia Ho, who were sitting in the wind and snow, the 2 hours were very long. No matter how cold the wind and snow was, their bodies had already warmed up. For His Majesty in the palace and Su Shi on the other side of the snow bridge, the 2 hours were very short. Because the Academy's attitude made them feel helpless and they had no time to do more. Just when the 2 hours were about to end, the imperial court finally found a way. The palace gate suddenly opened. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, and Xing Jing, the grand secretary of the imperial library, hurried to the field under the escort of dozens of eunuchs and began to read His Majesty's decree. Prince Li Peiyan walked silently at the back of the crowd. Xing Jing, the grand secretary of the imperial library, ranked last in the Tang cabinet. However, he was Song Song's biological father and had a special status. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, was a cultivator and usually did not care about the court affairs. However, he and Ning Ke were old friends. Since Master Yen Sei, Ning Ke had to call him Uncle Master. His Majesty asked them to read the decree, so he naturally wanted to move them with affection. Sure enough, Ning Ke had to stand up and salute them when he saw them. Xing Jing coughed twice and reached out to wipe off the snow on the imperial edict. He said, His Majesty's decree. Everyone in front of the imperial city held their breath and pondered. Xing Jing glanced at Prince Li Peiyan and sighed softly. Then he said bitterly, Li Peiyan, Prince Yi of the Tang Empire, requests to be stripped of his title due to the incident in the first year of Tianqi era. Everyone was silent. The people in front of the imperial city could not suppress their shock and looked at His Majesty. Li Peiyan's noble crown was still in the snow between Ning Ke and Xia Ho, and it was about to be buried by the snow. His hair was a little messy and he looked a little embarrassed, but the expression on his face was unusually indifferent. Xingjing ignored the reaction of the crowd. He held the imperial edict with both hands and continued to read in a trembling voice. The case of the former Xianwei General Lin Guangyuan's treason is now revoked due to lack of evidence. The names on the imperial edict were read one by one through the Grand Secretary's trembling voice. His voice echoed in the wind and snow and hit the red wall. Xianwei General Lin Guangyuan, Mrs. Lin Guangyuan, Deputy General Xia Gang, Captain Cheng Xinjing. Secretary Lin Hai, subordinate Hu Hua. Listening to the names that had long disappeared in history, listening to the imperial edicts that restored officials and conferred posthumous titles, there was dead silence in front of the imperial city. His Majesty's imperial edict did not mention reopening the old case. However, a prince requested to be stripped of his title, and all the soldiers involved were rehabilitated. What was the difference between this and reversing the case? People finally understood the meaning of the imperial palace. His Majesty had once thought of reversing the case of the Xianwei general's treason. However, because of the situation in the imperial court and the West Hill Divine Palace, especially the lack of evidence, he did not succeed. Today, the Academy tacitly allowed Ning Ke to challenge Xia Ho, which set a difficult problem for the imperial court. However, His Majesty could not reverse the case without evidence, so he chose this method. Even if it was not to reverse the case, it was still to reverse the case. At least, this could give an explanation to those who died unjustly and Ning Ke today. When the imperial edict was read, Xia Ho stood up from his chair. His Majesty's imperial edict did not involve him, but he gradually frowned and slowly sat back down. Those names were still floating in the wind and snow. Xia Ho knew those names and had seen the people that those names represented. More than a decade ago, he had seen those people die in front of him with his own eyes. He had seen those heads piled up into a hill. Some eyes were closed, some eyes were open, and some eyes were filled with despair, while others were filled with anger. Those names were heard again after more than a decade. In front of the imperial city, they entered his ears. He became more and more silent, and his face became more and more livid. He held the armrest of the chair more and more tightly. He did not feel guilty, nor did he blame himself, nor was he sad. He was just angry. The armrest was reduced to dust, falling from the gaps between his fingers. With anger, it landed on the snow. No one noticed General Xia Ho's emotions at this time, because His Majesty's imperial edict did not mention him. According to the law, he was no longer General Xia Ho. What he needed to do was to accept it calmly and then leave Chang'an. Everyone's eyes were on Ningquebec. They knew who His Majesty's imperial edict was for. If they wanted to stop this duel of life and death, they could only hope that Ning Ke would withdraw the challenge invitation. His Majesty reversed the verdict for Lin Guangyuan, rewarded him generously, and favored him for 3 generations, just for this. People in front of the imperial city looked at Ning Ke under the black umbrella and thought that this should be the end. From the moment he heard the name Lin Guangyuan, Ning Ke lowered his head and focused on the thick snow under his feet. He tilted his head and listened to the names on the imperial edict attentively. He had heard of those names before, so he listened very carefully today. But the expression on his face was very complicated, with some gratification, some disappointment, and some self-mockery. The names on the imperial edict were finally read. Grand Secretary Xingjing and Nation Master Li Qingshan walked to him and solemnly handed the imperial edict to him. Ning Ke took the imperial edict and remained silent. Li Qingshan looked solemn and said, "His Majesty said that as long as you admit to the previous murders, he will pardon you. After all, it is pardonable. If you think that the removal of the prince's title is not enough to compensate, His Majesty and Her Majesty will apologize to you on behalf of General Xia Ho and compensate you." The Nation Master spoke very softly and was covered by the wind and snow. Except for himself and Ning Ke, no one could hear him. But people could guess what he was talking about with Ningquebec. However, Ning Ke made an unexpected decision just when everyone thought that this was the end of the matter and gradually relaxed. Ning Ke put the imperial edict on the chair behind him and looked at Li Qingshan, Xingjing, and the people in front of the imperial city. He laughed and then raised his hand. He began to clap. In the beginning, his movement was very gentle, but then it became more and more forceful, as if he was beating a wall. The wound on his palm burst open again and blood splashed everywhere. Clap, 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 clap. The applause became louder and louder. Blood splashed from his palm and then dripped onto his body, his legs, and finally fell into the snow. Seeing this scene, the people in front of the imperial city felt a sense of coldness and horror again. Their bodies gradually became cold with the wind and snow. His Majesty is very kind. The law of the Tang Empire is indeed useful. It is very good to hear the names on the imperial edict resound in Chang'an again. I am very comforted. Ning Ke sighed and said, "It is a pity that some names are still forgotten. I am very sorry." Xingjing asked nervously, "Who else was left out?" "I will go to the palace to ask His Majesty right away." Ning Ke smiled and said, "I also left out many names in the general's mansion, such as the groom, the cook, the gardener, the maid, and my parents." Xingjing said in confusion. The first titles were the general and his wife. Ning Ke looked down at the snow under his feet and the blood spots on it. After a long silence, he said, "The general and his wife are not my parents." As soon as he said this, the wind and snow suddenly dispersed. I finally wrote this part. I am very happy. There is one more chapter today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 472. Since a long time ago, the military had begun to investigate the connection between Ning Ke and those strange murder cases. Although they did not find any evidence, the rumor of his origin had already spread in Chang'an. Everyone believed that Ning Ke was the son of Xianwei General Lin Guangyuan, the orphan of the massacre. He had been dormant in the world for many years and finally entered the academy. Once he gained power, he would start a bloody revenge. Even His Majesty Xiahou and many senior brothers and sisters at the back of the mountain of the academy believed this rumor. Therefore, at this time, when the people in front of the imperial city heard Ning Ke's words, they could not help but be shocked and could not believe it. They thought to themselves, "If you are not Lin Guangyuan's orphan, then why did you do these things?" Xiahou looked at Ning Ke under the black umbrella and frowned. No one knew what he was thinking. Ning Ke looked down at the blood spots that looked like plum blossoms on the snow. He seemed to see the blood spots on the ground in the woodshed 15 years ago, and a strange smile appeared on his face. The wind and snow suddenly scattered and gathered, gradually becoming faster and faster. Ning Ke raised his head, looked at the crowd and asked 3 questions. "Why do you all think I'm the general's son? Why must I be the general's son? Why do you all want me to be the general's son?" Everyone was still in a state of extreme shock and couldn't answer his question. Ning Ke laughed at himself and said, "Unfortunately, I'm not. My father is not the Xianwei general, not a captain, not a subordinate officer, not even a clerk. He is just a gatekeeper of the general's mansion and a gatekeeper of the second gate. Even so, he doesn't get much. My mother was naturally not the general's wife. She was just a lowly servant girl. Although she had fed the young master and could enter the inner residence, she was still just a servant girl. Your Majesty has reversed the verdict for the general. I am very gratified. This is my true feeling, because the general and his wife were good people. They died unjustly, but I am very regretful that I did not hear my parents' names." He looked at the crowd in front of the imperial city and said, "This is a very natural thing. My parents were originally unremarkable people, and their names were also very unremarkable. My father is an orphan. The general gave him the surname Lin. His name is Lin Tao. My mother didn't even have a name. She was sold to Chang, and from Hebei County. She was called Li Sanyang from her childhood, until her death, because she vaguely remembered that she was the third child in her family. The blood continued to flow down Ning Kei's palm onto the snow. His expression was very calm, and so was his narration. It was not indifference but true calmness. However, this unemotional calmness made everyone who saw Ning Kei's face feel a chill rising from the soles of their feet, and then their whole bodies froze. The calmness was frightening. Sang Sang was not afraid. She just felt what he was feeling at this moment. She felt his sadness and the coldness in his body and mind. She subconsciously reached out to hold his hand, wanting to give him some warmth. I know that's what's written in the books. Ning Kei said calmly. The prince who was robbed of the throne left his hometown and returned to take revenge. A young master of a minister who was framed by a treacherous official escaped. Many years later, he became the top scholar and was favored by His Majesty. Then, he reopened the case. He looked at the crowd and asked seriously, "But why must the protagonist of every revenge story be a prince? Is the son of a gatekeeper and a maidservant not qualified to take revenge?" Faced with this calm but powerful question, the people in front of the imperial city could only remain silent. Xingjing wanted to say something, but he could not open his mouth. Li Qingshan sighed softly. That's what's written in the books, and that's what people think. I know that I can't blame anyone, and it's stupid to feel sorry for oneself. But I still hate this kind of thinking. Just like a dozen years ago. Ning Kei looked at Xia Ho and said, "That day, I took the young master to play on the street as I often did, because he treated me as a good friend. That's a bit too much. Anyway, the housekeeper wanted to preserve the general's bloodline, so he took me to the mansion of the official of council across the street." Hearing this, Zheng Jing the Grand Secretary's expression slightly stiffened. He thought of the scene across the street when his wife, who was still a concubine, gave birth to a daughter and the scene of a river of blood across the street. Ning Kei continued, "When you led the troops into the general's mansion, I was hiding in the woodshed of the official of council's mansion with the young master and the housekeeper." Xia Ho said gloomily, "My subordinates finally chased us to the woodshed and saw 2 dead bodies. At that time, I was sure that Lin Guangyuan's son was dead, so I was very confused about your identity. Now I'm not confused anymore, but I'm curious about what you did at that time." Ning Kei looked at the wind and snow around, as if he was recalling something. He smiled and said, "There's nothing new under Haotian. It's just the same old stories. If the general's son wanted to live, the gatekeeper's son had to die. They were both 4-year-old boys who were badly mutilated and changed their clothes. Who could recognize them? The housekeeper thought that there was no need to be vigilant against a 4-year-old boy, so he looked at me in a daze. His eyes were filled with apologies, sympathy, and sadness. At that moment I knew what he was going to do. He spread his hands and said with a smile, 'Isn't that what's written in the book?' Then the smile on his face gradually faded. He looked at Xia Ho, Xingjing, Li Qingshan, and all the people he could see. He asked expressionlessly, 'But why? Why should I do what is written in the book? Why the general's son wanted to live, but the gatekeeper's son had to die? Why should I die?' The wind and snow fell on the palace gate. Everyone was silent. No one could answer this question, so it was quiet. Only Ning Kei's voice was still floating in the snow, and it was floating higher and higher, colder and colder. "I'm just the gatekeeper's son. But I want to live. I want to live." Ning Kei's voice was calm and firm. He talked about his thoughts in the past, as if he was talking about the eternal truth that the sun must rise every day and the water must flow down. He continued, "So when the housekeeper tried to trick me into taking off my clothes and taking the chopper himself, I grabbed the chopper first and stabbed it into his stomach. I stabbed him more than once." Ning Kei recalled what happened in the past and said with a frown, "It seemed to be 5 times. Because I didn't have enough strength, I couldn't stab him deeply enough, so I had to stab him a few more times. But I don't know why the housekeeper didn't scream. He just looked at me in horror, as if he was looking at a devil. All these years, I've been thinking whether he was too scared to speak or he didn't want to alarm the people outside the woodshed. After a moment of silence he continued, "The young master, that is, the son of the general, did not know what happened at that time. He only saw the housekeeper, whom he had always loved the most, lying in a pool of blood. He rushed towards me as if he had gone mad. He wanted to hit me and bite me. He shook his head and said, 'I was also very panicked at that time. I waved the chopper wildly and somehow cut his neck. Then he covered his neck and fell back on the woodpile. The blood in the young master's neck spurted out from the gaps between his fingers. I wanted to cover it for him, but I couldn't. In the end, his blood condensed into paste on my fingers.'" Ning-Kei raised his head and looked at the people in the snow. After a long silence, he shook his head and said, "It wasn't manslaughter. Maybe I wanted to kill him at that time." He looked at Xia Ho and said with a smile, "Because only if he died, people like you and His Highness would no longer care about me, the gatekeeper's son." The world was shrouded in the wind and snow, shrouded in a dead silence. The snowflakes drifted to Ning-Kei's face and touched his smile, which seemed to be even colder. It was a smile that seemed gentle but was actually extremely cold. People looked at the smile on Ning-Kei's face and were shocked speechless. They felt an unprecedented chill. They seemed to see the scene in the woodshed of the official of Council's mansion more than a decade ago. A 4-year-old boy, holding a rusty chopper, stood in front of the two corpses. His face was full of despair and fear, and his body kept trembling, as if he could collapse at any time. But the boy didn't collapse. Now, the boy was standing in the wind and snow, standing in front of the majestic palace, standing in front of people, telling the story of that long ago. The stories in the books were often written like that. The story he told was not in the books. On the first anniversary of the night, I finally told one of the stories I wanted to tell the most in this story. I feel very happy. 8:00, crooked. 55373, let's chat. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 473. On the precipice of the back mountain of the academy. The headmaster wore a black robe and sat on the edge of the cliff, looking at Chang and city in the distance. It was snowing heavily. From afar, it looked like Haotian was giving salt to the human world. 15 years ago, I sat here and looked at the woodshed of the official of Council's mansion. The headmaster said, "I saw your youngest brother walk out of the woodshed with a machete in his hand. I saw him grab a rope and hide in the well. I saw him climb over the wall and walk into the crowd. I saw him leave Chang and city. It was as if I saw your youngest uncle's appearance a long time ago." Eldest brother stood aside and asked, "How did youngest brother and youngest uncle resemble each other?" The headmaster shook his head and said, "I don't know. Maybe it's the strong desire for freedom?" "I can understand why you said that about youngest uncle," eldest brother asked confusedly, "but what does the tragedy that youngest brother encountered have to do with freedom?" The headmaster said, "The so-called freedom is the right to choose. Choose to live, choose to die, or choose not to choose. Back then, your junior brother chose to pick up that hatchet and kill his housekeeper and his best playmate. At that moment, he took his first step towards freedom." Eldest brother said honestly, "Teacher, I don't understand." The headmaster said, "You are the clearest stream in the world. You have been flowing freely in the mountains all these years. Maybe you have encountered dangerous shoals and reefs, but you have never encountered a real fork in the river. You have never encountered the choice that your youngest brother faced. No one is qualified to judge whether the choice your junior brother made back then was right or wrong. However, the fact that he was able to make this choice is already extraordinary. Just like your junior uncle back then, No matter what kind of situation they face, they will only do what they want to do. Eldest brother said, "That's why you want to take youngest brother in." The headmaster said with emotion, "In the spring, when I met your youngest brother in the building of pines and cranes and talked to him in the hut, I found that he was different from your youngest uncle. I felt sorry at that time. But that's how the world is. How can two identical leaves be found?" The headmaster looked at the snow clouds in the distance and Chang, a city shrouded in the wind and snow. He said with relief, "But today your youngest brother's choice still surprised me. I never thought that he would have the courage to challenge Xiaohou. I like the clumsiness in his choice." He turned to look at his eldest disciple and said with a smile, "Among the academy disciples, you are the clumsiest, so I like you the most. But in some aspects you really have to learn from Jun Mo and youngest brother." Eldest brother solemnly accepted the advice, but looking at the wind and snow in the distance, he could not suppress the worry in his heart. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "If youngest brother really loses to Xiaohou, what should I do?" The words "if" and "really" in this sentence were very meaningful. This meant that in the eyes of the eldest brother of the academy, Ning Ke and Xiaohou were not powerless to fight. "I don't believe in heaven, nor do I believe in fate. I only believe in myself." The headmaster glanced at the dark winter sky and said, "Everyone can only believe in themselves. This is your youngest brother's own choice. It is his mockery and contempt for the heaven's way and destiny. Therefore, he needs nothing but a fair environment." The dead silence in front of the imperial city lasted for a long time. The increasingly violent wind and snow covered the blood flag, making the big black umbrella sway slightly, and the people's faces seemed to be frozen. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, looked at Ning Ke with a complicated expression and said, "Is that it?" Ning Ke did not say anything. Li Qingshan sighed softly and shook his head helplessly. He said, "His Majesty said that if you insist on continuing this duel, then you must first hand over the item." He reached out his hand to Ning Ke and said, "You know what His Majesty said." Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and asked, "Why?" Li Qingshan said, "Is this a personal grudge?" Ning Ke said, "Yes." Li Qingshan said, "Since it is a personal grudge, how can you use the national weapon?" Then he said seriously, "If this duel is over and you are lucky enough to survive, then I will return the item to you." Ning Ke looked at the thick snow under his feet. After a moment of silence, he took out an item tightly wrapped in cloth from his arms, but he did not hand it to Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan frowned slightly and said, "Don't you even believe in me? I have always believed in no one but myself." "Sorry," Ning Ke said and then handed the item wrapped in cloth to Chen Pippi behind him. Li Qingshan smiled bitterly and no longer cared about what happened in the venue, walking towards the imperial palace. The people in front of the palace gate did not know what Ning Ke took out from his arms, so they could not help but be curious. Xiaohou clearly felt the faint fluctuation of aura from that item. He frowned slowly and looked at Ning Ke and said, "So the array eye is really in your hands. No wonder you are so bold to challenge me." Ning Ke said, "I have said before that I still have many powerful means." Xiaohou slowly stroked the armrest of the chair, as if he did not notice that there was nothing there. He said, "Now that the array eye has been taken, you still insist on killing me?" Ning Ke said, "You have killed a lot of people, and so have I. People like us should be very clear that there are many ways to kill people." Xiaohou said indifferently, "You know you will definitely die, but you still insist on killing me. Is it for revenge? Can a 4-year-old boy have such a long memory? Can you remember the faces of your parents? I don't believe it at all. I think you just can't get rid of the psychological shadow of that year." Hearing this, Ning Ke said, "I have to admit that my hands are very uncomfortable with young master's blood. I can't wash them clean no matter how I wash them. My fingers are always sticky. Maybe I do have a psychological shadow. I used a hatchet to kill people for the first time, and then I got used to using a knife. He looked at Xia Ho and said, "But so what? What's the point of saying this?" Xia Ho slightly raised his eyebrows and showed a look of ridicule and contempt on his face. He said, "At least it can prove that your revenge is not as great and righteous as you think." Great and righteous? Ning Ke shook his head and said, "After escaping from Chang'an, I have imagined countless times over the years. One day I will meet an extraordinary person in the mountains and inherit a peerless skill. What will I say before I break into the military camp to kill you? I will ask you why you are so cruel and murderous. I will say that killing you today is to seek justice for the ghosts in the general's mansion, the burnt corpses in the villages in the Yen territory, and all the innocent people who died. The list is very long, and I added a very good friend to it at the end." Speaking of this, he looked at Xia Ho and said with slight mockery, "These are some very awe-inspiring and righteous words, but what does it have to do with me?" The cold wind and snow attacked his body. Ning Ke covered his mouth with his fist and coughed twice. Then he spat a thick phlegm into the snow. The yellow phlegm was very eye-catching in the clean snow. "I have killed no less people than you, and I have also done many evil things that others can't imagine. My hands are never clean, and I am not a messenger of justice." He looked at Xia Ho and said, "No matter how many innocent people you kill, it has nothing to do with me. As long as it has nothing to do with me, I can even applaud you. But since you have killed my family, I will naturally kill you. This is a matter of course, and I don't need any other reason." Xia Ho was silent for a long time, and suddenly said, "A little interesting." Then he stood up from the chair. It was as if an indestructible mountain had suddenly appeared in the snowstorm. "Come and kill me," he finally said, "or be killed by me and end your painful life." The city of Chang, and at dusk, was like falling into the eternal night. The thick snow clouds covered the last afterglow and the sky full of stars. It was dark beside Yanming Lake, and only the distant torches illuminated the falling snow, turning the dense and whistling snow into the human world's starlight. Xia Ho looked at the closed courtyard door in front of him expressionlessly. He reached back and took the military flag from his bodyguard. He walked to the front of the courtyard door, holding the military flag in his right hand and pointing it down. His movement was very casual. The ground in front of the courtyard door was hard stone. When the flagpole fell, the stone ground was broken into pieces, splashing countless gravel, and the end of the flagpole was deeply inserted into the mud. Xia Ho slowly loosened his palm. The flagpole was firm as if it was born from the ground. The blood-red military flag fluttered in the sky full of snow, engulfing all the night. This blood-red Royal General flag had accompanied Xia Ho for many years. Whether it was fighting with the Yen Kingdom army or the cavalry of the Left King's palace, this flag had always been flying in the northeast border military of the Tang Empire. Over the past few decades, this blood flag had never fallen. Just like the powerful man under the blood flag, the bodyguards at the periphery of Yanming Lake, the vigilant ministers, and the local government runners of Chang, and local government who maintained order, all looked at the blood flag in the night and had a strong feeling. Tonight, this blood-red flag would still not fall. Xia Ho walked up the stone step. Then he pushed open the courtyard door. So he walked into the night. Ning Ke was not in the house by Yanming Lake. He and Sang Sang were standing on Yanming Mountain on the south bank, overlooking the distant opposite bank. Sang Sang held the big black umbrella to block the increasingly violent snow. In the eyes of the world, Ning Ke's most powerful cultivation state was talisman and arrow. To fight with Xia Ho, a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, it was natural for him to keep a distance. Although Xia Ho did not know where Ning Ke was at this time, he could guess it. However, as proud and confident as he was, he did not care about it at all. But tonight the wind and snow were strong and the night sky covered the stars. In the cold winter, Yanming Lake was like a frozen ink stone. No matter how sharp Ning Ke's senses were, he could not see the scene on the opposite bank. If he could not see, then how could the primordial 13 arrows hit the enemy? That's all for today. I need to sort it out and delete some. 2 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 474. This snow seems to be unfair to me, but it is actually unfair to Xiaoho. Ning Ke looked at the other side of the lake and the snow on the lake. He shook his head and continued. His Majesty took away the array pestle, which naturally doesn't make me happy. But it is fair. My cultivation state is far lower than Xiaoho's, so it seems unfair. But in fact, I have prepared for 15 years, and he doesn't know that there is a person like me in the world who has been watching him silently. So the unfairness here is even. As long as this battle is limited to me and him, then I will admit that it is fair. Sangsang held the handle of the big black umbrella tightly and shrank her body to ensure that the umbrella would not be blown away by the violent snow. She whispered, "Young master, are you worried that someone will intervene? After all, Xiaoho is a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism besides being a general of the empire. I always feel that someone will interrupt this battle. I did feel something when I held the array pestle." Ning Ke thought of his peers in the academy and said, "But I am not worried, because this is Chang'an and not other places. As long as the academy is still in the south of the city, no one is qualified to intervene. Perhaps some forces wanted to intervene in this battle, but more people were just silently waiting for the battle to begin by the Yanming Lake, such as Yi Su who had left the small Taoist temple. The best place to watch a battle was, of course, a high place. At this time, he was on the city wall of Chang'an, and his plain white robe was fluttering in the night snow. Many people thought that the West Hill Divine Palace did not want to see the battle between Xiaoho and Ningquebe. In fact, the envoy of the Divine Hall had indeed raised objections to the Imperial Palace, but he, who came to Chang'an on behalf of Haotian Taoism, could ignore the Divine Hall's attitude. Although he also wanted to see Xiaoho retire safely, he did not mind the battle happening. Because no matter how Yi Su deduced, he could not imagine that Ning Ke could win. It was good that Xiaoho could win. It was better that Xiaoho killed Ning Ke and offended the academy. Because then, he could no longer stay in the Tang Empire and retire peacefully, nor could he waver on the wall. He could only pledge his loyalty to Haotian Taoism. Although the Dao Sect's idea is good, we must first ensure that Xiaoho can win. A voice rang out from the top of the city wall. This person spoke very slowly, but his voice was still very clear in the snowstorm. It seemed to be able to calm people's hearts. Eldest brother walked to Yi Su's side and looked in the direction of the dark Yanming Lake below the city wall. Yi Su said, "We just met in the morning and you're here again?" Eldest brother said, "Yes, I'm here to take a look." Yi Su asked, "What are you here to see?" Eldest brother looked at Yi Su and said with a smile, "Now that your sword style is calm, there is no one else but Mr. Liu Bai who can beat you in Chang'an. That's why I came to see you. Looking at you is actually looking at you." Yi Su looked at the falling snow in front of the city wall and said expressionlessly, "No one in Chang'an is my match, but there is an academy outside the city." Tonight, the wind and snow were furious. Many people were sitting peacefully in the snow. The third minister of offerings of Qinghe County sat in the winter forest on the east bank of Yanming Lake. The night snow fell from the sky. He looked indifferent, as if he did not feel the coldness around him. Considering the interests of the Qinghe County families and Her Highness, he could not allow anyone to disturb this battle. However, he had a feeling earlier, so he came to the forest and waited silently. A monk walked slowly in the night snow. It was dark in the forest, but the monk's cotton kasaya and the bamboo hat on his head could be clearly seen, naturally revealing a sense of righteousness. The third minister of offerings looked at the monk walking in the wind and snow and frowned slightly. A few years ago, he was already a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. However, at this moment, he found that he could not see through the monk's depth. He could not help but be extremely vigilant and have a desire to fight. When powerhouses confronted each other, they fought for a moment. There was no need for any verbal probing, nor was there a need to ask about the origin of the mountain. The third minister of offerings reached behind him and pulled out the hilt of his sword. The sword rubbed against the edge of the scabbard, making a very subtle sound, like snowflakes falling on a thick layer of snow. However, the sword was only pulled out halfway before it was forced to stop. The third minister of offerings' eyebrows gradually rose. His hand holding the hilt of his sword trembled slightly, and all the cultivation in his body spurted out. However, the sword in the scabbard behind him did not continue to be pulled out. Instead, it slowly returned to the scabbard. The sound of the sword rubbing against the scabbard was as quiet as falling snow, but it made his heart palpitate. The monk wearing the bamboo hat walked slowly in the wind and snow, and was only a few feet away from him. The third minister of offerings' body was extremely stiff. His hand holding the hilt of his sword trembled like a withered branch in the snow. Looking at the monk, there was only fear left in his usually proud eyes. The monk did not make any move. There was no change in the aura of heaven and earth in the snow forest. He just walked slowly, and yet a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state could not pull out his sword. The third minister of offerings was extremely shocked. He could not imagine any cultivator in the world who could have such a skill. In a flash, he guessed the monk's origin and his pupils shrank. Someone from the Xiankong temple? The third priest looked at the monk who was getting closer and closer. He looked at the monk's gentle and determined eyes. His stiff body began to tremble slightly in fear. He let out a muffled groan and his face suddenly turned red. His skinny fingers suddenly spread out and escaped the traces of the aura of heaven and earth floating in the snow forest. He wanted to escape from the monk's control. The monk raised his right palm in front of him. He bent his index finger slightly and made an unknown emblematic gesture. The wind and snow in the winter forest suddenly became stronger. Thousands of snowflakes seemed to fall on the third minister of offerings of Qinghe County. The snowflakes sensed the supreme power of the monk's emblematic gesture and sank into the third minister of offerings' clothes. They turned into countless invisible snow ropes and tied him up. The monk glanced at him, his eyes full of benevolence and pity. Then he started walking again, stepping on the thick snow, walking past him, as if he was walking towards the lakeside outside the winter forest. The third minister of offerings sat alone in the snow. He could not move at all. His flushed cheeks had already become extremely pale. His eyes were filled with shame and fear. He was the respected ancestor of Qinghe County. After his cultivation entered the knowing destiny state, he became even more arrogant and confident. He did not even have much respect for the legendary unknown place like the academy. On this snowy night, he finally met a monk from the unknown place. He finally understood that a legend was just a legend. In front of the monk, even a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state did not have the slightest qualification to be arrogant. The third minister of offerings thought of how he had boasted shamelessly in the princess mansion. He said that he wanted to create some disputes between the academy and Haotian Taoism. Now, he was tied up in the snow by the monk's emblematic gesture. He could not help but feel endless shame and wished that he could die. On the high city wall, Yi Su waved his hand to disperse the snowflakes within 50 feet in front of him. He looked at the dark forest by the Yanming Lake and said coldly, "That idiot from Qinghe County is extremely stupid. Even a small stem borer wants to be involved in the torrent. It's really disgusting." The eldest brother smiled and did not say anything. Yi Su said, "I wanted to kill that idiot. But since the mute has taken action, forget it." The eldest brother shook his head and said, "How can I watch you violate the laws of the Tang Empire?" Yi Su smiled slightly when he heard the words, "the laws of the Tang Empire." Eldest brother looked at the shore of Yanming Lake and thought of the monk who was walking through the winter forest to the lakeside. He said, "The battle between youngest brother and General Xiahou is probably a grand event in the eyes of many people in the world. That is why you came to Chang'an. I just hope that nothing happens to youngest brother." Yi Su said, "You know that I came to Chang'an not because of this battle, but because of Ningquebec. That mute is naturally here for Ningquebec." The eldest brother was very clear about what Yi Su wanted to say, but he remained silent and did not answer. Yi Su looked at the Yanming Lake and suddenly said with emotion, "Those people who appeared around the Black Line 15 years ago, except for Tang, all of us are here." The eldest brother said, "Actually, Tang is here too. The injuries on General Xiahou were all caused by him. So even though he did not come, his fists did." Yi Su said, "That makes sense. But even if Xiahou has countless fists left by Tang, in my opinion, Ning Ke still has no chance in this cross-state battle. I know what you want to say and what you are worried about. I respect youngest brother, so I will not do anything." The eldest brother smiled and said, "Of course, I know that if youngest brother knew what the Academy is thinking, he would definitely cry and beg me not to respect him." Yi Su said, "What does Mr. Second mean by stopping Su Shi on the snow bridge?" The eldest brother said, "It means fairness." Yi Su said, "Xiahou is far more powerful than Ningquebec. Does the Academy think this is also fair?" The eldest brother said, "Teacher once taught us that fairness is the intention and has nothing to do with strength. As long as both sides are willing to do so and accept the rules, then it is fair." Yi Su was silent for a long time as he thought of the words of the headmaster of the academy. Then he looked at the night forest by the Yanming Lake and frowned slightly. He said, "If that mute wants to speak, there are few people in this world who can stop him." Yi Su turned to look at him and asked, "Jun Mo is stopping Su Shi, and you are looking at me. Then who can stop him? I will not stop him. And the moment he speaks, even I cannot stop him. Do we need to alarm the headmaster of the academy?" The eldest brother looked at the lake in the cold winter night and frowned in silence. The snow was dancing. The monk walked in the forest towards the Yanming Lake. 15 years ago, in front of the Black Line, he smiled slightly, chewed his tongue and swallowed it. He never spoke again and had been practicing the silent meditation ever since. Tonight, he stepped into the mortal world again. No one knew if he would speak or what he would say. People only knew that he had been silent for 15 years. Once he opened his mouth, the Buddha's voice would be as clear as thunder. Even Yi Su, the powerful successor of the Jishou Abbey, did not want to hear the first sentence he would say. Who would talk to the monk? Did the headmaster of the academy really need to come down the mountain? At this moment, a very thin layer of snow fell from the night forest. The snow was extremely thin, so thin that it was translucent, like a cicada's wing. "I'm going to pick up the leader and then go back to my parents' home with her. The second chapter will be updated very late. I have to report to everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 475. It was windy and snowy in the forest at night. However, the seemingly light snow was not blown away by the howling night wind, nor did it disappear into the dense snow. Instead, it fell from the sky alone and arrogantly, ignoring the surrounding wind and its companions. It slowly floated down and landed on the shoulder of the third Minister of Offerings. The third Minister of Offerings of Qinghe County was bound by the monk's emblematic gesture. He sat cross-legged in the snow and could not move at all. He could only watch the thin snow fall on his shoulder and could not help but feel confused. When the thin snow fell, the monk stopped walking toward the lakeside. His straw sandals sunk deep into the thick snow. Then he turned around and looked at the thin snow in silence. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound in the forest. The sound was like sharp pieces of ice rubbing against each other. Accompanied by the wind and snow, It was naturally mournful and sounded like the chirping of cicadas. Cicadas were creatures of summer and would be silent in the autumn wind. In this context, cold cicadas were silent. However, the wind and snow were cold tonight, and there seemed to be countless cicadas in the forest. Those cicadas hid behind the branches in the upturned bark, hanging between the spider webs, and sitting in the ice and snow. They watched the falling snow and the monk in the wind and snow, chirping wantonly. The cicadas kept chirping. The forest was full of cold cicadas. The chirping of the cicadas in the forest became more and more intense and mournful. The thick snow on the branches was shaken and fell down. However, there seemed to be two large and invisible cicada wings above the forest by the lake, covering the whole sky and preventing the chirping of the cicadas from spilling out of the forest. The mournful chirping of the cicadas was colder than the snow and more elusive than the night wind. It sounded everywhere, returned to silence, and revived everywhere. Finally, it fell into the ears of the monk. The chirping of the cicadas in the forest seemed to be indifferently saying, "Repent and you will be saved." The monk listened to the increasingly mournful chirping of the cicadas, and his expression became more and more solemn. His name was Qin Yan. He came from the Xiankong Temple and was a powerful world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect. Because of the records in the temple, he came to Chang'an to see the legendary son of Yama. He was even ready to kill that person even if he had to face the academy. Ever since he started to practice silent meditation, his Zen heart and willpower had become firmer and firmer. Even the countless powerhouses in Chang'an and the mountain of the academy in the south of the city could not move him. Logically speaking, no sound should be able to stop his footstep. But these cicadas were different, because he knew that these cicadas represented a person. He was the most mysterious person in the world, and could even be said to be the most terrifying person in the world. Even if the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple was here, he would have to treat the cicadas with the utmost caution. Qin Yan's expression was solemn, even with the respect that a junior should have. But his eyes were still firm, and he slowly pointed to the Yanming Lake behind him. He used this action to tell the person behind the cicada that his Higan was over there. The third minister of offerings of Qinghe County was tied up by the snow rope made by the emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect and could not move at all. But he could see, hear the mournful chirping of cicadas in the forest. Looking at the thin snow on his shoulder, his face became paler and paler, and his expression became more and more frightened. He was a grand cultivator of the knowing destiny state, and he knew many secrets of the cultivation world in the Qinghe County book collection. Although he was not sure, he had vaguely guessed the identity of the person in the forest. To cause the cicadas to cry in such a snowy night, and to make the Vedanta of the Xiankong Temple so solemn, it could only be the most mysterious master of the devil's doctrine in the world, the 23-year cicada cultivation. After the front gate of the devil's doctrine was destroyed, the force that had once set off bloody storms in the world had withered. But no one dared to ignore the current master of the devil's doctrine. For many years, no one had seen the master of the devil's doctrine, or even heard of him. So the master became the most mysterious legend in the cultivation world. Rumor had it that the master of the devil's doctrine was possessed by the devil while practicing the 23-year cicada cultivation and had already turned into a pile of bones. But some people also said that the master of the devil's doctrine was hiding somewhere in the world, watching the world indifferently, and might appear at any time to summon the wind and rain again. But no matter what, no one in the cultivation world would forget this person. Even those who believed that he was dead, in fact, were frightened and uneasy at night. They always felt that one day, the master of the devil's doctrine would reappear in front of the world at a moment that no one could imagine. It was indeed a moment that no one could imagine. At least it was a moment that the third minister of offerings of Qinghe County could not imagine. Just before the decisive battle between Ning Ke of the Academy and General Xiahou, the world wayfarers of Taoism and Buddhism sects arrived in Chang'an. 23-year cicada cultivation actually reappeared in the world. The third minister of offerings was terrified. But then, he thought that the master of the devil's doctrine was confronting the Vedanta of Xiankong Temple, and he thought that he might have a chance to survive. His eyes rolled subconsciously. His eyes turned slightly, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw the snow on his shoulder that was as thin as a cicada's wing. Then he remembered that he had forgotten something in the legend. According to the legend, the master of the devil's doctrine did not kill many people because he disdained to kill ordinary people. He thought that only grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state were qualified to be killed by him. According to the legend, the reason why the master of the devil's doctrine was the most mysterious person in the world was that he would kill everyone who had heard the sound of cicadas. The third minister of offerings was in the knowing destiny state, and he had heard the sound of cicadas tonight. The third minister of offerings understood this, and then he died. The snowflake that was as thin as a cicada's wing flapped its wings and gently wedged itself into his old neck. Blood spurted out from his neck and sprayed into the wind and snow, making a hissing sound. It was also like the sound of cicadas. The sound of cicadas was the sound of the vibration of the drum of cicadas. It could vibrate thousands of times in an instant. Therefore, it could tear silk when it was clear, make people cry when it was sad, and make them feel sad when it was bleak. The sound of blood splashing was the vibration of the friction between the blood and the wound. It was similar to the sound of cicadas, so the sound was similar and could be equally sad. The mute monk turned around and looked at the third minister of offerings of Qinghe County, who was sitting cross-legged in the deep snow. He frowned slightly, knowing that this was a warning from the man in the forest. He was a disciple of Buddhism. He could kill people, but he did not want to. That was why he used the emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect to bind the minister of offerings. However, he did not expect that he would become the accomplice of the powerhouse from the devil's doctrine. The monk knew why the 23-year cicada cultivation reappeared in the world, and why it used the sound of cicadas to stop him from going to Yanming Lake. Because Xia Ho was a traitor of the devil's doctrine, and he was someone that the 23-year cicada cultivation had to kill. If the master of the devil's doctrine was really dead, then it would be fine. But since he was still alive, he had to kill Xia Ho or watch him die. The master of the devil's doctrine had probably endured for many years because of the academy and the imperial court of the Tang Empire. Now that the academy had decided to kill Xia Ho, how could he allow others to intervene? The 23-year cicada cultivation might be afraid of the headmaster of the academy, but he would never be afraid of the Xiankong Temple or the Jishou Abbey. The mute monk could understand the intention of the sound of cicadas, but it did not mean that he could accept it. The Buddhism sect had always been called the outer way by the Haotian Taoism sect, but it belonged to the righteous way after all. Although he knew that the powerhouse from the devil's doctrine in the forest was unfathomable, how could someone as strong-willed as him stop? He was Qin Yin, the successor of the Xiankong Temple. He began to get angry, but it was anger. It was not coquettishness nor anger. The monk still pressed his lips tightly together, and his eyes were firm. His hands were constantly changing in front of the cotton kasaya, and in a moment, they formed a cold emblematic gesture. It was the brightest and most powerful emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect, the Akalanatha gesture. The two seemingly ordinary fingers in front of the old kasaya curled up like orchids, and the majestic aura followed the direction of the emblematic gesture and scattered around the snow forest. Silently, the snow in the forest suddenly scattered into the sky, and suddenly the wind and snow in the air stopped. The sound of cicadas, which seemed to be everywhere in the night forest, also stopped. However, then the sound of cicadas sounded again, and this time it was brighter and more violent. It seemed that a person was laughing loudly. The wind and snow in the forest became stronger, and the snow fell even faster. The snow that had just been shaken up from the ground instantly covered the ground again, and the snowflakes in the air were shooting at Qin Yan's body. Qin Yan's expression did not change. He lightly stepped on the snow with his straw sandals, and bounced his right calf to hit the bend of his left knee. Then he sat on the snow like a half-snow lotus. The flying snowflakes were like countless cicadas, whizzing and hitting Qin Yan's body. There seemed to be an invisible barrier on the surface of Qin Yan's body. When the snowflakes were half an inch away from his body, they could no longer move forward. However, the snowflakes did not fall, but stuck to the surface of his body like cotton. In a moment, his kasaya was covered with snow, and only his face and hands with the Akalanatha gesture were outside. He looked like a snowman. Qin Yan looked into the depths of the night forest and saw the frost on his eyelashes. The muscles on his cheeks twitched slightly, and he seemed to be hesitating whether to say something or not. He had practiced the silent meditation for 15 years, and he was finally going to speak tonight? At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the depths of the night forest. That voice was so quiet and peaceful. It was a sharp contrast with the irritated cicadas in the forest. However, the words that came out of such a tranquil voice were so cold. If you speak, I will make 100,000 mutes in the world. Hearing this, the monk was furious. He opened his eyes wide and looked into the depths of the night forest. The frost on his eyelashes evaporated, and the snow on his body turned into warm water and dripped down. He knew that even if he spoke tonight, he might not be able to defeat that person. But that person could definitely set off a bloody storm in the world. If he was facing Mr. First, Mr. Second, or even the headmaster of the academy, the monk could ignore them, because he knew that the academy would not be so shameless. But that person was 23 years cicada cultivation. That person could do anything. So he was angry, but he still could not speak. After saying this, the person in the depths of the night forest did not speak again. But Qin Yan knew that he was still here, because the cicadas were still chirping. The monk could not speak, nor could he sigh. He could only sigh softly in his heart, and then dispersed the Akalanatha seal. He put his palms together to guard his heart, and then slowly closed his eyes. The snowflakes continued to fall like cicadas, covering the monk's body and covering his facial features, turning the successor of Xiankong Temple into a snowman in the night forest. The snow that had been falling for a whole day and night suddenly became lighter at this time. The chirping of cicadas in the forest gradually became weaker, but it became more and more sad. Cold cicadas were sad. Facing the winter lake, the heavy snow had just stopped. Let me be excited. This is also the picture that I have been writing for a whole year. Maybe half of the fun of writing a novel is here. Tomorrow is Saturday. See you the day after tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 476. Beside the Yenming Lake, the mountains on the south bank and the snow forest on the east bank were all quiet. There was no sound, let alone the sound of cicadas. On the city wall, eldest brother and Yi Su looked through the heavy snow and fell on the forest. Their expressions were slightly strange, as if they felt something was happening there. However, they did not have the energy to pay attention to what was happening in the snow forest, because they saw the blood flag fluttering in front of the Yenming Lake house. Xiaoho pushed the door open and entered. The courtyard door was a little new, as if it had been repaired not long ago. Xiaoho pushed the door open and entered the dark courtyard. He suddenly heard the sound of cicadas, and his body could not help but stiffen. During the day in the imperial palace, he also vaguely heard the sound of cicadas coming from the dancing snowflakes in front of the hall. He was sure that it was an auditory hallucination, but at this time, although the sound was still unreal, it seemed to be a little real. The indifferent expression on Xia Ho's face did not change at all. He slightly raised his eyebrows and looked more violent. He steadily stepped over the threshold and walked through the corridor to the main hall. There was a short pause in the snow, and then it flew more violently. Thick clouds covered the sky full of stars, and the wind and snow dimmed the lights in Chang'an. It was so dark beside the Yanming Lake that one could not see his fingers in front of him, but Xia Ho could see everything clearly. There were a few winter plums planted under the stone step. For some reason, the plum branches were scattered, and fresh stubble could be seen under the snow. It seemed that they had been eaten by some elegant animals. There was a pot of green plant in the house. Even in the cold winter, the plant was still growing vigorously. Its branches and leaves were plump and green, which made the yellow soil in the pot even more boring. The thick and straight black beam on the roof was slightly deformed. It should have been hit by some kind of impact, and there were 2 very small cracks on it. It did not seem to affect safety, but it was still a little scary to look at. On the side of the unique display shelf, there was an oil lamp. The oil lamp was made of celadone, and the lamp string was white. When it was not lit, it was also a very beautiful work of art. Ning Ke had spent countless taels of silver on this house by the Yanming Lake, and Mr. Qi had spent a lot of effort on it. Moreover, it had been bought by Her Majesty and Liu, so it was extraordinary. Compared with those famous gardens in Qinghe County, it was not inferior. Even the inconspicuous things were worth appreciating. Xia Ho was a general and would never be sentimental about the changing seasons. Naturally, he had no interest in this aspect. However, in the face of a great battle, his gaze on the plum bushes, black beams, bonsai, and oil lamp was so focused. In fact, he did not look at the plum bushes, the black beams, the bonsai, or the oil lamp. He was looking at the yellow paper peeking out from the snow on the plum trees, the yellow paper stuck between the cracks of the black beams, the yellow paper in the bonsai, the yellow paper under the celadone lamp. In this world, there was a kind of paper that was usually yellowish. It was called fu paper. There were talisman papers everywhere in the house by the Yanming Lake. This was a residence made of talismans. The reason why Yi Hongyu could defeat Chen Pippi was that she knew him and knew his fear. I also know Xia Ho very well. Since the day he betrayed the devil's doctrine, Xia Ho has been afraid. Maybe he was afraid of the mysterious grandmaster of the devil's doctrine, or maybe he was afraid that the West Hill Divine Palace would expose his identity. Because of fear, he felt empty. He began to kill people like flies and began to be cruel and arrogant. Ning Ke took the big black umbrella from Sang Sang and looked at the courtyard shrouded in the night snow. Only in this way can he get rid of his psychological shadow. What he said in front of the palace gates was right. I also have a psychological shadow, so I understand that his pride is a fatal weakness that he cannot get rid of. Because of his pride, he has now stepped into the battlefield that I have chosen. This is the first mistake he has made. How to make use of his mistake? I don't know. I only know that I must not hesitate to use more than 300 talismans that I have painstakingly written in the past 2 years. Writing talismans was not as casual as it seemed. Except for Ning Ke himself, not many people knew how many sleepless nights he had spent writing more than 300 talismans, how many times his psyche power was exhausted, and how many times his sense of perception had been shaken. Sang Sang knew. Because of those nights accompanied by oil lamps, she had been waiting by Ning Ke's side. She saw him sweat like beans and his face was pale, but he still wrote. In those nights, Ning Ke was not plowing the fields, nor writing the articles, but only the talismans. On the edge of the cliff in the snow, Sang Sang looked up at Ningquebec. Seeing that his face was as pale as those nights, she was very worried. But she smiled and said, "Yes, young master will definitely win." Ning Ke closed his eyes and held the handle of the umbrella. His eyebrows and right hand were trembling, and his face was pale. The psyche power in his sense of perception spread along the black umbrella into the snow-filled sky. Psyche power was the foundation of orthodox cultivators. However, cultivators could only use psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth, and then use various means. Even if a psyche master could directly attack the enemy with psyche power, it was limited to a very short distance. That was because psyche power had a characteristic that could not be changed. This characteristic was that once the psyche power left the cultivator's sense of perception, it would rapidly disperse with the distance and return to nature. Ning Ke was standing on the cliff on the south bank of Yanming Lake. He was a few miles away from the courtyard on the other side of the lake. If he wanted to trigger the 300 talismans hidden in the courtyard, he needed to send his psyche power to the other side. However, how could his psyche power cross the winter lake in the night snow? At this moment, something amazing happened. After his psyche power passed through the handle and the surface of the big black umbrella, there was an obvious change. It was not that the concentration of the psyche power had increased, but the speed at which it dispersed into the snow had slowed down. Because of the acupoint obstruction tune in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow, the aura of heaven and earth around the lake could not understand the song that he sang with his psyche power. But at least his voice could travel further. Ning Ke's psyche power quietly passed through the wind and snow and landed in the courtyard on the opposite bank. The yellow paper that was under the celadone lamp turned into nothingness with a slight sound. A faint sense of dryness came out of nowhere. The white, jade-like lamp rope that had never been lit suddenly tightened. The oil was released and a weak flame was ignited. The oil lamp was dim, but it slightly illuminated the inside and outside of the hall. As the celadone lamp strangely ignited without fire, there were countless changes in the room. The display shelf where the oil lamp was located was completely ignited. However, the space where the display shelf was also ignited, turning into a blazing fireball that covered Xia Ho's mountain-like body. The fire was faintly discernible and terrifying. Wherever it passed, everything was turned into nothingness. Only the green plant in the pot was different. The slightly drooping, green and tender green leaves melted like fat when they were burned by the tongue of fire in the room. They turned into light green oil and dripped into the flower pot. The yellow fu paper that was stuck in the green leaf disappeared. The green leaf turned into oil and fell into the soil. The flower pot suddenly cracked and the yellow soil inside exploded, filling the space in the room. The granular yellow dust was unknowingly extremely heavy. Every grain of gravel was like a stone, shooting toward Xia Ho's body. Then, the yellow paper on the black beam disappeared into thin air. With a loud crack, the heavy beam broke from the middle without warning and smashed toward Xia Ho's head. Xia Ho squinted his eyes. His iron-like eyebrows were not furrowed. They reflected the fire and seemed to be burning. He punched. That terrifying fist was so domineering that it squeezed out all the air in front of him. The blazing talisman fire was suddenly extinguished. It was extremely gloomy. He closed his eyes. He let the yellow gravel hit his body like stones. There was a series of crackling sounds. Countless tiny but powerful pieces of gravel smashed into his body. It was like countless hailstones falling from the sky and hitting the eaves of the palace. The robe on his body was instantly riddled with holes. But there was no expression on his face. He lowered his head. The two halves of the black beam smashed into his back. Then it broke into more pieces. The heavy beam could kill a dozen people. But it could not make his body tremble. Facing Ning Ke's 3 talismans, Xia Ho only punched. This was the peak of martial arts. Especially since he was originally a powerhouse of the Devil's Doctrine, he could ignore any attack below the knowing destiny state as long as he closed his eyes. The yellow gravel that shot out like flying stones did not leave any mark on his face. The broken beam rolled and groaned under his feet. He was not hurt at all. Only one eyelash floated away from his eyes. With Xia Ho's cultivation state, he did not have to face Ning Ke's 3 talismans directly. He could have avoided them. He could have used the simplest way to break them with a wave of his hand. The reason why he did not do so was that he had been paying attention to the broken plum flowers under the stone steps behind him. Ning Ke thought he knew him very well. He also thought he knew Ning Ke very well. He knew how cold and sinister Ning Ke was. He believed that Ning Ke would never waste 3 precious talismans just to test his strength. There must be a backup plan. There was also a yellow talisman in the broken plum flowers. Xiaoho thought it was Ning Kei's killing move, so he focused on it. As expected, the next moment, the yellow talisman in the broken plum flowers turned into a wisp of smoke. The few remaining plum flowers trembled and left the branches. They flew like butterflies to the back of Xiaoho's head. Xiaoho did not look back. He casually pointed behind him. When his fingertips touched the plum petal, his iron eyebrows suddenly frowned. The petal turned into a drop of water. The talisman in the broken plum flowers turned out to be such a shallow water talisman. Xiaoho frowned because he found that he had made a mistake in his judgment. But he did not care. He looked up with an indifferent expression. The black beam had been broken. There was a big hole in the roof. People under the eaves could see the starry sky when they looked up. It was windy and snowy tonight. There were no stars to see. Only countless snowflakes could be seen pouring in from the hole along with the night wind. There was also a talisman that was gradually dissipating into coldness. The snowflakes that fell from the hole seemed to have grown many times larger as they danced in the air. An extremely cold talisman suddenly enveloped the entire building. Even the air in the building froze. Xiaoho looked up at the falling snow. His eyebrows were instantly covered with a thick layer of frost. I was too excited when I wrote the 2 chapters the day before yesterday, which resulted in a serious increase in typos. I have changed them in the document. The mistakes in the VIP chapter will not be dealt with for technical reasons. I am going to massage and drink. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 477. This was a very powerful talisman. In a twinkling of an eye, the temperature in the house dropped sharply. Xiaoho's eyebrows were stained with frost, and the surface of the armor inside his coat also began to freeze. For a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, this cold talisman was powerful, but it still could not cause direct harm. He frowned slightly, and the frost on his eyebrows suddenly broke. Then he took a step forward, and the thin ice on the armor also broke and fell to the ground. But at least at this moment, Xiaoho needed to condense the qi of heaven and earth on the surface of his body with psyche power. He could no longer use his strong body and fists to fight against it as before. The battle in the lakeside house did not temporarily come to an end. In the next moment, countless yellow fu paper shot out from the inconspicuous corners of the house. The dense yellow talisman papers fluttered in the air like snowflakes falling from the hole in the roof. They danced and rotated around Xiaoho's body. As the psyche power came from an unknown place, the yellow fu paper flying like snowflakes were triggered one by one. They turned into illusions or wisps of green smoke, and the talisman power spurted out. Then the talisman power that was triggered first drove the untriggered fu paper to fly faster. The yellow fu paper in the lakeside house spouted like a waterfall, illuminating the night sky. This scene was very beautiful and shocking. Fu paper was so precious. In the past cultivation battles, who had ever seen so many fu paper appear at the same time? Immediately after, more talisman papers were activated. Countless talisman wills intertwined together, tearing the surrounding world's yuan qi into countless turbulent streams. The turbulence of qi of heaven and earth was very terrible. Even the weakest talisman power seemed to have some special power when mixed in the turbulence that cut the space. Xiaoho stood in the middle of the sea storm of talisman power and in the turbulence of the qi of heaven and earth. The emotions on his face were very complicated, a little sad and a little angry. Because he clearly remembered that this was the secret method of using talisman power by his most loyal subordinate, military stream Gushi. He did not expect that Ning Kei would use this method in the battle tonight. The cold snowy wind, the violent night wind, the scorching flames, the suffocating humidity, all kinds of completely different seal intents were squeezed together by an invisible hand. There was no reason, but it was so terrifying. Xia Ho clenched his fists with an indifferent expression. His tattered coat was torn and flew, revealing a brand new armor underneath. Then, with his extremely vigorous psyche power, he extracted what he needed from the turbulence of the chi of heaven and earth and condensed it on the surface of his body, forming an invisible but extremely strong invisible armor. The invisible chi of heaven and earth armor, together with the visible metal armor, tightly isolated him from the surrounding heaven and earth, and from the storm of talisman intent and the turbulence of chi. Xia Ho lifted his feet and walked among the yellow talismans that were flying all over the sky. The violent talisman intent kept hitting his body, making muffled sounds or sharp cutting sounds. Under the attack of the talisman, the armor on his body was sometimes covered with a thick layer of ice, and sometimes it was bright red and dazzling, as if it had been burned for 7 days and 7 nights. In order to resist the sea of talisman intent, his psyche power was slowly and irreversibly consumed, but the expression on his face still did not change at all, and his footsteps were still so stable. Xia Ho was very clear that Ning Ke was the successor of Master Yen Sei and was regarded as the future divine talisman master by the world, so he was very sure what he would face in the battle tonight. However, the number of talismans prepared by Ning Ke was far more than what he had calculated before. What was more unexpected was that Ning Ke would display all his talisman Taoism skills at the beginning of the battle. It should be known that a talisman master needed to touch the talisman with psyche power, and the distance that the psyche power could spread was congenitally limited. At this time, the lakeside house was full of flying talisman papers, which could only mean that Ning Ke was in the house at this time. Xia Ho thought that Ning Ke's approach was very confident, very proud, very arrogant, and also very idiotic. Any cultivator who fought with a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts but did not try to keep a distance was an idiot. Since Ning Ke was by the lakeside, then he was not in a hurry to leave the sea of talisman storm. He let the talisman storm continue to consume his psyche power, because he wanted to find Ning Ke and then kill him in one fell swoop. He continued to walk forward without any movement, and a gray wall in front of him suddenly collapsed. He looked at the deep night, looked at the faintly visible lake willows in the south of the house, and said with slight mockery, "If it is not a divine talisman, how can it hurt me? Since you are so eager to die, then die." Yanming Lake was irregular. The west bank of the lake was relatively narrow and far away. The lake water was clear and shallow. Someone built a wooden bridge across the lake, and people could enjoy the water plants in the lake. It was winter, and the wooden bridge was full of snow. The lake water under the bridge had all condensed into solid thick ice, and the green silk-like water plants could no longer be seen. Only a few yellow and white reeds swayed in the wind could be seen. In such cold weather, the imperial court had blocked the area around Yanming Lake, so naturally there were no tourists. However, there were a few people standing on both sides of the wooden bridge, looking at the west of the lake with different expressions. Yi Hongyu's green Taoist robe was a little loose, and it fluttered in the wind and snow. She looked at the lakeside house in the distance, and felt the talisman storm there. There was a trace of surprise in her eyes. She had lived in that house for a long time, but it was not until now that she knew what Ning Ke had done in the house and how many terrifying talisman papers he had hidden. The Tao addict was an extremely confident person, but she had to admit that if Ning Ke used the talisman storm to deal with her, she would definitely be in an extremely difficult situation. On the other side of the wooden bridge, Chun Pippi held an oil paper umbrella in one hand and held Tang Xiaotong's small hand in the other. He looked at the shining light in the distance from time to time in the west, and looked at the countless yellow papers dancing like a waterfall. He said in shock, "We all know that youngest brother is stingy, but who would have thought that he would make such an extravagant move tonight?" Tang Xiaotong's hand was a little cold. She was worried about her friend's current situation, and also shocked by the impact of the talisman papers by the lake. She murmured, "Talisman is such a terrible thing." On the cliff of the south bank of Yanming Lake, Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked at the talisman paper storm in the house on the other side of the lake. He heard the faint sound of the wall falling and the tiles flying. I asked Seventh Sister to design the tactical array and the big black umbrella to make Xia Ho make a wrong judgment, to make him think that I am in the house. Xia Ho is actually very cautious and suspicious. On this basis, he has abnormal confidence. Since he judged that I am there, he will definitely believe that I am there. He said sarcastically, maybe he is still taunting me at this time, asking me to come out and fight to my heart's content. Sang Sang looked at the other side of the lake and frowned. She said, but his strength is too strong, and the talisman sea seems to be unable to deal with him. I never expected this talisman storm to directly defeat Xia Ho. After all, I am not a divine talisman master. The talisman papers I sprinkled in the flower pots may only become useless smoke on his armor like moths flying into the fire, but there may be talismans that can cut off one of his eyelashes. He continued, a falling eyelash is nothing, and he may not even notice it himself. But many a little makes a mickle, and it can be fatal. Just like walking, as long as you keep walking, one day you will get to the place you want to go. Even if Xia Ho is an indestructible mountain and my method is an inconspicuous spoon, if I keep hitting it, even if I keep hitting it for a long time, this mountain will still be loosened by me. The surface of the mountain will loosen, the rocks will turn into powder and fall, and the mountain will collapse and the earth will shake. After saying this, Ning Ke handed the big black umbrella in his hand to Sang Sang. Sang Sang took the big black umbrella and looked at him. She said, yes, young master, you will definitely win. Ning Ke's psyche power was rapidly consumed by triggering hundreds of talismans at the same time across the lake. His face was a little pale, but his eyes were still calm. He looked at the other side of the lake and slowly raised his right arm. His fingers trembled uneasily, as if there was a heavy mountain hanging between his fingers with invisible strings. He slowly moved his right arm and drew 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines in the wind and snow in front of him. The invisible and dignified lines pointed to the house on the other side of Yanming Lake. In the house, the yellow paper that was dancing in the sky all turned into nothingness, and the dazzling light gradually faded. The violent and terrifying talisman intent was still constantly tearing the chi of heaven and earth. It was calm but contained danger. In the relatively sparse snowy night elsewhere in Chang'an, 4 faint lines appeared. Those lines had no color and should be transparent and invisible, but they could be seen. The reason why the 4 lines could be seen was that the dancing snowflakes in the night sky suddenly fled in all directions. Some of the snowflakes that could not escape quietly turned into nothingness. The 4 lines in the night sky were traces of no snow. The 4 lines, 2 horizontal and 2 vertical, formed a Jing character. The violent talisman intent in the night sky all condensed in this Jing character. Well, both horizontal and vertical meant to cut. Jing Fu was the most terrifying and profound talisman intent of Master Yen Sei when he was alive. Before he perished together with the great divine priest of light at the top of the nameless mountain, the Jing Fu that he used could even cut the space and cut off the Haotian divine flame that the great divine priest of light obtained in the Tianqi state in the space. Ning Ke inherited all the mantle of Master Yen Sei, so he was naturally the most diligent in the study of Jing Fu. Although his state was not enough and he could not fully exert the power of Jing Fu, the Jing Fu he wrote was already powerful enough and was the most powerful talisman he could use now. And he didn't know when he could cast talismans in the indefinite form. This method was already close to the level of calligraphy addict Mo Shanshan in the wilderness. In other words, this well talisman was his half-divine talisman. Jing Fu fell from the night sky and covered the whole courtyard by the lake, as if there were countless smaller Jing Fu hidden in it, and nothing could escape. The plum blossoms were cut, the well was cut, the wall was cut, and everything was cut when the Jing Fu fell. The Jing Fu, which was straight and sharp to the extreme, fell on Xia Ho. On the surface of his body, the armor condensed by the chi of heaven and earth, There were 4 very clear marks, slightly sunken, and the brand new armor inside had 4 rusty marks. Xia Ho's dark face suddenly turned white, and then quickly turned red, then snow white, and then flushed, changing rapidly. Psyche power came out. The chi of heaven and earth condensed on the surface of his body shook uneasily, sunk and bounced back, and finally supported the Jing Fu, but it had become much thinner, like a piece of thin paper. Then, a light sound came from his body, and the armor was broken into countless metal pieces along the 4 rusty lines, like broken copper and iron falling under his feet. Xia Ho looked at the other side of Yanming Lake, looking at the dark night. Until then, he realized that he had been in the well, and Ning Ke had been outside the well. Last night, I got a cold after drinking and blowing in the wind. I feel dizzy, my lips are blistered, and I feel suffocated. What I want to say is, I will write another chapter, hoping to improve my character. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 478. When the talisman power rose from the lakeside, Yi Su stood in the wind and snow on the city wall and said, Uncle Yen Sei really knows people well. Who would have thought that Ning Ke could have such skills in just a few days after he started talisman Taoism? In his opinion, the talismans written by Ning Ke were not very powerful, and some of them were even obvious beginner's skills. In the eyes of ordinary people, they would be amused. However, the fact that Ning Ke had written so many talismans in less than 2 years really shocked him. What shocked Yi Su most was Ning Ke's method of using talismans. The talisman sea storm by the lakeside seemed to be chaotic, but in fact it had its own rules. The cooperation between each talisman was perfect. Otherwise, it would be impossible to create such momentum and effect. Eldest brother explained with a smile. Youngest brother is a great calligrapher. He is good at writing. He has profound attainments in how to break down and write characters. Yi Su slightly frowned and said, I still can't understand how he could write so many talismans. Talisman Master paid attention to talent. Whether he was the successor of Jishou Abbey or the sage of Sword Lu Bai, it was difficult for him to get close to talisman Taoism in his life. But it did not mean that he had no understanding of talisman Taoism. Any talisman master could only use the talismans he wrote. Even if a divine talisman master like Master Yen Sei could leave several divine talismans for his disciples, the number would not be too much. Talisman master needed a lot of psyche power and painstaking efforts to write talismans. It also needed a lot of materials. Ning Ke had only been making talismans for 2 years. How could he write so many talismans? The Academy has nothing but a lot of cultivation materials. If there is any shortage, the Imperial Court will help to prepare it. As for the psyche power needed to write talismans, eldest brother smiled and said, Mr. Yi Su probably doesn't know that youngest brother's psyche power can be ranked in the front in the back of the mountain of the Academy. The disciples in the back of the mountain of the Academy were not famous in the world. However, Yi Su was very clear that those people must have their own talent. At this time, when he heard that Ning Ke's psyche power could be ranked in the front in the back of the mountain of the Academy, he could not help but feel a little surprised. At this moment, Jing Fu appeared over the lakeside house. Yi Su felt the straight and piercingly cold talisman intent coming from that direction. His eyebrows slowly raised and he looked in the direction of Yanming Lake for a long time. Then his eyebrows gradually relaxed and he said, Half-divine talisman is not a divine talisman after all. The eldest brother looked at the lake in the night and said with a little regret, although the youngest brother has made great progress, he hasn't been practicing talisman Taoism for long, so he hasn't become a divine talisman master yet. Yi Su shook his head and said, Divine talisman master, so what? Unless you reach the level of martial Uncle Yen Sei, if you want to defeat someone like Xia Ho with just a light talisman paper, it can only be wishful thinking. I've never thought that I could kill Xia Ho with talisman Taoism. My master probably had such an ability in his heyday, but I didn't. Naturally, I have my own ideas. Ning Ke looked at the other side of the river, which was once again swallowed by the darkness of the night, and said, "Everyone says that one can't challenge someone of a higher state. No one in the world, including the senior brothers of the academy, believes that I can defeat Xia Ho. But I insist on doing it because they have all miscalculated one thing. I have never thought of defeating Xia Ho. I only want to kill him. If you don't defeat the enemy, how can you kill the enemy? A battle is only a moment, but killing a person can be a very long process. There can be many battles in it. In the countless battles before, I may not be able to defeat him, but I can make him bleed. Then, even if I still can't defeat him in the end, his blood may be drained. When his blood is drained, he will naturally die. Tonight, Xia Ho and I are not competing with strength, psyche power, or state, but to see who can drain his blood faster. He is a powerhouse of the devil's doctrine, and his defense is too terrifying. He is like a turtle. What I have to do is to constantly bleed this turtle, and make sure that I won't be bitten to death by him." Ning Ke said solemnly, "Thank you, Tang. I have broken the outermost layer of the turtle shell on Xiao's body. Then, what I have to do next is relatively simple." Sang Sang looked at him and said, "We will succeed." Ning Ke said a lot today and explained a lot. If it was not Sang Sang beside him, but another audience, such as Yi Hongyu would have been extremely annoyed and would have kicked him into the ice lake under the cliff. Sang Sang was a little surprised at first, but then she understood the reason. Ning Ke did not have the slightest confidence in facing Xia Ho. Even if his expression was so calm, and his tone was so peaceful, as if he was full of confidence and everything was under control, even if he had prepared for a whole 15 years. He still did not have confidence. So he kept talking about his preparation and the reason why he would definitely win, to make himself believe that he could really succeed in the cross-state challenge and defeat the seemingly invincible and powerful enemy. Sang Sang was very worried about Ning Ke's current mental state. So she kept using a more certain tone than Ning Ke, saying, "We will definitely win." When the whole world did not believe in Ning Ke, and even when Ning Ke himself was about to lose confidence, then she was the only one left who could give him the last bit of confidence. Because this was not only Ning Ke's battle, but also the battle between the two of them. Sang Sang put the big black umbrella on her thin shoulder and stretched out her right hand to tightly grasp Ning Ke's clothes. She gripped it so hard that her calloused fingers seemed to sink into his body. Then she slowly closed her eyes without batting her eyelashes. Xia Ho walked out of the lakeside courtyard and came to the lake embankment. In front of him were several willows. The berserk sea of talisman papers attacked his powerful body thousands of times. Although it didn't leave any wounds on his body, it cut his hair bun. His black hair was mixed with several stalks of silver, and it draped over his back, making him look like a demon god in a Buddhist painting. However, his tattered clothes and the broken armor tied around his waist made this demon god look very wretched. Xia Ho reached out and tore off the pieces of armor on his waist, like throwing garbage under the willow tree. Then he looked at the night sky around Yinming Lake and coughed. In the cold winter night, the temperature was so low that the lake ice was as hard as steel. But it should not make a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts who was as hard as steel feel it. Xia Ho was surprised that there were so many talismans in the lakeside courtyard that even the wind and snow could not bear it. He was surprised that Ning Ke's ability in talisman Taoism was much stronger than the rumors. What surprised him most was that Ning Ke could use talismans from such a distance. The accident made people vigilant. He knew that he had made a mistake, but since he knew what was wrong, he could correct it. Therefore, he did not care and still looked around the winter lake in silence. The shore of Yinming Lake was covered in white snow. However, the night was too dark. There were no stars or lights. Therefore, the bright sky and the earth were dim and the snow seemed to have turned black. The night shrouded the nearby willows and the distant reeds. Whether it was the frozen lake water or the hills around the lake, they were all dark. No matter how sensitive one's perception was, one could not see anything with the naked eye. Xiaoho did not know where Ning Ke was at this time. He only knew that he must be on the shore of Yanming Lake, but he did not know whether it was the wooden bridge on the west bank, the snow forest on the east bank, or the cliff on the south bank. But he was sure that if Ning Ke moved again, he would die. Ning Ke stood on the cliff, holding an iron bow in his hand. He raised the iron bow and slowly pulled the bowstring. The bowstring hummed slightly and was instantly covered by the wind and snow. There was some snow on the black iron bow, making it look colder. The iron arrow engraved with complicated talisman lines on the bowstring was aimed at the night sky on the north bank of Yanming Lake. The night clouds covered the stars, and it was dark everywhere. There were no stars and no figure. Xiaoho could not see him, and Ning Ke naturally could not see Xiaoho. This time was different from last year when he shot Prince Longqing on the snow cliff in the wilderness. At that time, Prince Longqing was at the critical moment of breaking the realm. His cultivation state was full of vigor, as if he was burning his natal life. In Ning Ke's sense of perception, he was like a golden flower that was about to bloom. Even if he was more than 10 miles away, he clearly did not need to aim. Xiaoho, as a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, could merge with the willows by the lake. Even if Ning Ke entered the knowing destiny state, he could not locate Xiaoho. In this case, where was he going to shoot the primordial 13 arrows in his hand? At this moment, Sang Sang, who was under the big black umbrella, closed her eyes and frowned her thin eyebrows. She said 2 numbers. 633. 21772. More than 2 years ago, deep in the Min Mountain in spring, an arrow came from the northern mountain road. At that time, the forest was burning. When the third assassin attacked Ning Ke, Sang Sang hid under the big black umbrella, closed her eyes, and shouted 2 words with all her strength. More than 2 years later, by the cliff of the ice lake in the cold winter, under the willows on the north bank, a strong enemy stood silently. At this time, wind and snow were dancing on the cliff, and Sang Sang shouted 2 numbers again. These numbers were coordinates that only Ning Ke and Sang Sang understood. In the past 15 years, they accompanied them to hunt in the Min Mountain. Fighting with their lives on the line had become instinctive and would not make mistakes. It was almost the same as 2 years ago, but the numbers shouted by Sang Sang tonight were much more complicated. The complexity of the number often represented the degree of accuracy. The cold and dark arrow moved slowly, looking for a target in the night snow. Then it stopped. He released the taut bowstring. The iron arrow left the bowstring and disappeared in the turbulent hole in front of the bow, and disappeared in the wind and snow. Xiaoho firmly believed that as long as Ning Ke attacked again, he would die. Ning Ke used the most powerful primordial 13 arrows. The dark iron arrow disappeared in front of the cliff a moment ago. The next moment, it suddenly appeared in front of Xiaoho. The talisman lines on the arrow were slightly bright, and the remaining snowflakes were not blown away by the wind. At this moment, the primordial 13 arrows seemed to break through the constraints of distance and time. They were even no longer affected by the surrounding environment. The cold arrow pierced through Xiaoho's close-fitting clothes. The chi of heaven and earth on the surface of his body suddenly sank. Xiaoho felt something. He reached out and grasped the air. He only had time to hold the middle part of the arrow. There were probably only a few people in the world who could hold Ning Ke's primordial 13 arrows. The iron arrow made an ear-piercing sound in the iron palm. Sparks flew everywhere, illuminating the willows by the lake. Tomorrow is the 2nd anniversary of my marriage with my leader. I only write 1 chapter. From the day after tomorrow, I will write 2 chapters a day until the end of the month. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 479. The iron arrow in Xiaoho's hand continued to move towards his chest and was about to pierce into his body. Xiaoho's eyes suddenly lit up like stars. With a roar, the sparks caused by the friction between the iron arrow and his palm were extinguished instantly. A strong wind blew on the embankment and the willows were all broken, dancing wildly in the snow. Accompanied by the terrifying impact, Xiaoho's body flew backward. His feet were like iron pillars stepping on the embankment, plowing two extremely deep ravines. If the Yanming Lake had not been frozen, the lake water would have flowed in. The cluster of the iron arrow pierced through the chi of heaven and earth on the surface of his body. It pierced through his clothes and skin, leaving a shallow wound from which a drop of blood slowly seeped out. Xiaoho raised his head and looked towards the southern shore of the Yanming Lake. His dark face turned pale and he began to cough. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. There was an empty passage above the ice lake on a snowy night. There was no snow in it. Only then did the snow fall again and was crushed into pieces by the aftershock of the arrow. This was the art of archery. The other end of the arrow was on the cliff on the southern shore of the Yanming Lake. Xiaoho finally confirmed Ning Kei's position. He looked over there expressionlessly and released a strong aura from his body. Snow and dust danced wildly and formed a circle among the swaying willows. Then, the ground where his feet stood suddenly sank, forming a perfect circle of about 10 feet. Borrowing the terrifying counterforce, his body disappeared from the lake embankment, leaving only the lingering wind. A few pieces of snow fell. Xiaoho left the embankment and began to run towards the southern shore of the lake. His feet stepped heavily on the surface of the lake. The ice of the Yanming Lake was extremely solid. Even with the impact of his body and high speed, it still did not break. However, every time he stepped, a few inconspicuous cracks would appear. Beneath the solid lake ice was the water. Feeling the mountain-like weight on the ice, it began to shake uneasily, making a dull and strange sound. It was as if drumsticks were beating heavily on a war drum, producing a dull thumping sound. This winter lake was his war drum. The frequency at which he struck the war drum was not high, but every strike was powerful. Xiaoho's running pace was not fast, but every step he took seemed to cross mountains and rivers. In the blink of an eye, his figure had already appeared on the frozen Yanming Lake. If someone could see through the darkness of the night, perhaps they would be able to see the afterimage on the lake. An expert at the peak of the martial Tao possessed absolute power. When he transformed his power into speed, it was difficult to describe the terrifying degree with words or comparison. The night wind on the snow lake was certainly not as fast as this, and neither was the falling snow. Even if Ning Kei's talisman arrows were faster, there was no way he could hit such a fast target. On the battlefield, this was a very simple principle. Both Xiaoho and Ning Kei had been through hundreds of battles, so they knew this very well. Xiaoho had been vigilantly waiting for the legendary primordial 13 arrows ever since he knew that Ning Kei was hostile to him. He thought for a long time and finally came to a conclusion. As long as he ran, the primordial 13 arrows would not pose any threat to him. His sturdy military boots cracked the ice on the lake and he arrived at the snowy lake. There were withered lotuses frozen in the water. They had long died and accumulated snow, looking very miserable. Just as Xiaoho stepped on a withered lotus, the other withered lotuses next to it trembled, as if they had regained some kind of vitality. Then, there was a loud bang. The ice on the winter lake cracked, the withered lotuses all collapsed, the fire burst, and the airwaves rolled wildly. Xiaoho's mountain-like body was actually shaken high up into the air. Among the fire and airwaves, there were countless shrill whistles and hissing sounds. The withered lotuses that were not shaken by the explosion seemed to have been cut by a sharp blade. They were all broken and turned into countless pieces. Xiaoho landed heavily on the snow lake, splashing snowflake. His knees were slightly bent and his military boots were torn, but his body was strong enough to maintain balance and did not fall. What followed him to the ground were countless extremely sharp and hard iron shards. The high-speed iron shards whistled and slashed the withered lotuses, then fell on the ice like rain. The sharp iron shards stuck to his body. The chi of heaven and earth on the surface of his body, at the most dangerous moment, blocked most of the power of the explosion and the cutting of the sharp iron shards. But there were still dozens of sharp iron shards that wedged into his body. Many wounds appeared on Xiaoho's hard skin, and blood began to flow. At this moment, the second iron arrow arrived. It was sudden and without warning. Xiaoho looked at the snow floating on the winter lake and timidly avoided it. He poured his qi into his right arm and waved it expressionlessly. This seemingly simple wave caused the night wind to blow on the snow lake and the ice to roll wildly. There was a sharp crack. A clear cut appeared on his right arm. The iron arrow was shaken and brushed past his body into the snow lake. With a boom, a dark and gloomy hole appeared on the extremely hard lake ice. Xiaoho suddenly looked up and stared in the direction of the south bank. Then, he began to run again. He confirmed that he had underestimated Ning Kei's means. But he could no longer retreat. He had to close the distance between him and Ningquebec. Therefore, no matter how many tricks were hidden in this winter lake, or how many explosions like the one before were hidden in the withered lotus field, he had to rush over. He continued to run into the lotus field. Then, the second explosion occurred. The primordial 13 arrows could ignore the distance, but not the moving speed of the target. Ning Kei also knew this. Moreover, Xiaoho's devil's doctrine was extremely powerful. His physical strength was not comparable to Prince Long Qing's. Therefore, he never expected to kill Xiaoho with the primordial 13 arrows alone. Fortunately, there was a lotus field in Yanming Lake. In late spring, Ning Kei bought all the houses by the Yanming Lake and turned it into a lake in his backyard. He planted many lotus flowers in the lake. In midsummer, he and Sangsang boated on the lake and walked through the dense lotus field. They enjoyed the lake, the wind, the stars, and the lotus seeds. Then, they threw many small iron kettles into the lotus field. In winter, Yanming Lake was frozen. The surface of the ice was thick, and the lotus field had long withered. The small iron kettles that had sunk deep in the mud of the lotus field began to wake up. With the awakening of the small iron kettles, explosions sounded one after another on the snow lake. The blazing flames and terrifying waves of air shook the snow on the surface of the lake into the air. Countless sharp and hard pieces of metal whistled through the wind and snow. Many black holes appeared on the hard layer of ice on the lake. Between the whistling wind and the iron pieces, Xiaoho was already covered in blood. What was more terrifying was that every time he slowed down because of the explosion, Sangsang, who was holding the big black umbrella on the cliff of the south bank, would report his position. Then, Ning Kei would shoot an arrow. The next moment, the terrifying and cold iron arrow would arrive in front of Xiaoho. The small iron kettles were flowers. Ning Kei and Sangsang had planted many lotuses in this winter lake, and the number of kettles they threw would be the same number of flowers on the lake tonight. The iron arrows were thorns. Ning Kei had 13 primordial 13 arrows in his arrow box. Then, he would definitely take advantage of the time when the snow lake was blooming to shoot all of them. I have reported to everyone that there are some things that I will not write today. I will try to write more tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 480. The winter lake should have been quiet and dark under the night snow. However, there was a strong gust of wind on the surface of the lake tonight, accompanied by terrifying explosions and sparks. Iron lotuses blossomed in the frozen lotus field. The thick snow on the surface of the lake was thrown up by an invisible force and sprinkled into the dark night sky. The thick layer of ice collapsed and exploded. The ink-like cold lake water kept slapping against the black hole, stirring up snow-like waves and then dissipating into the real snow. In the withered lotus field, Xiaoho was once again shaken by the airwave. Accompanied by the sharp sound of iron shrapnel, His mountain-like body broke through the wind and seemed to be thrown above the night clouds. On the cliff of the south bank of Yanming Lake, Sang Sang held the big black umbrella tightly in one hand and Ning Kei's clothes in the other. She lowered her head and closed her eyes. She did not look at the chaotic scene on the lake in front of the cliff, but she seemed to be able to clearly capture the position of everything. She whispered 2 numbers again. Hearing the 2 numbers, Ning Kei did not hesitate to draw his bow and shoot at the distant night clouds above. It was pitch black and he could not see clearly what was there, but he knew that Xiaohou was there. The sky was covered in a blizzard. It was pitch black and the arrow could not be seen. Only the sharp whistling of the primordial 13 arrows could be heard. When people heard the whistling of the arrows, it was already the next moment. The night clouds above Yanming Lake suddenly fluctuated and the qi of heaven and earth became chaotic. It was as if there was an explosion of thunder in the dark clouds, and the dim wisps of clouds fled in all directions. The night clouds suddenly broke and blood splashed. Xiaohou fell from the sky. This time, he could no longer maintain his balance and smashed heavily on the ice, causing a few deep cracks to appear on the ice. A cold and dark iron arrow pierced deeply through his left arm. Because of anger and pain, Xiaohou's eyes seemed to be burning. He was like an injured beast king. He grabbed the tail of the iron arrow and pulled it out from his upper arm. He continued to run towards the south bank. He only had time to take 3 steps forward. At the bottom of the lotus field, there was another powerful explosion in the mud. The layer of ice under his feet suddenly cracked, almost swallowing his body into the dark and cold lake water. What followed were the heat waves, flames, and the extremely sinister and terrifying sharp iron pieces. When the waves in the lake passed through the ice and reached the feet of the military boots, Xiaohou made the most timely response with the ability of a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts. With a heavy step, he left the frozen surface of the lake and flew into the air. Then, he raised his fists in front of him as fast as lightning. Xiaohou let out a muffled groan as he was sent flying hundreds of feet away until he was out of the lotus field. His arms and the parts of his body that could not be covered by his arms had dozens of small pieces of iron. Blood seeped out of the wounds, looking like red grass in the wilderness in autumn. Although Xiaohou was a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, his spirit and qi and blood had been severely depleted after continuously withstanding the explosions in the lotus field, especially the primordial 13 arrows from Ningquebec. The qi of heaven and earth that had condensed on the surface of his body had dissipated and could no longer protect his body. His skin, which was as hard as metal under the effect of the devil's doctrine's genuine qi, now had numerous wounds on it. Although there were no fatal injuries, his bloody appearance made him look extremely pathetic. At this moment, another primordial 13 arrow pierced through the burning lotus and snow, silently arriving in front of Xiaohou, not giving him any chance to breathe. Xiaohou put his palms together and forcibly clamped the terrifying iron arrow in front of him. His body retreated another 100 feet on the ice. The ice and snow under his body splashed everywhere. His face was pale, and more blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Ning Kei stood under the cliff on the south bank of Yanming Lake, silently watching all the movements on the surface of the lake. When Xiaohou was once again blown up and retreated, he used the flash of light from the explosion to determine Xiaohou's position. After hearing Song Song's position, he stroked the bowstring with his fingers. Archery was the most powerful skill of the woodcutter at Shubi Lake. However, in the past, ordinary bows and arrows did not mean much to martial arts cultivators. But once a weapon like the primordial 13 arrow appeared in the world, Ning Kei would become a nightmare for all cultivators in a sense. Ning Kei's shooting was not fast, but there was a very strange sense of rhythm. From the moment Sang Sang reported the position to the moment the iron arrow left the bowstring, the process was so smooth that there seemed to be no waiting. There was some kind of truth hidden in the process. In the face of such powerful archery, and more importantly with Sang Sang beside him, Xiahou could not avoid those silent but powerful iron arrows no matter how strong he was. He could only resist, endure, and continue to bleed. It all depended on whether his blood would run out when Ning Ke finished shooting the 13 iron arrows, and whether he could rush to Ning Ke's side. The speed of the primordial 13 arrow was too shocking, far faster than the speed of sound. So only when it hit the target would the sound of the arrow travel diagonally in both directions. By the wooden bridge on the west bank of Yanming Lake, the reeds suddenly swayed. Yi Hongyu's green Taoist robe fluttered, and then she heard the sound of the arrow. Primordial 13 arrow? Yi Hongyu was slightly shocked. She had seen the primordial 13 arrow on the snow cliff in the wilderness and by the Daming Lake. She knew the power of the talisman arrow that gathered the wisdom of the second floor of the academy. However, the wind and snow were chaotic tonight, the reeds were swaying, and her green Taoist robe was fluttering in the lingering sound of the arrow. Only then did she realize that in less than a year, Ning Ke's primordial 13 arrow had become even more terrifying. Then, the explosion in the lotus field of Yanming Lake spread to the snow bridge. She frowned and said, "What is this?" Explosions after explosions, flashes after flashes of fire, shrill screeches of spinning metal pieces, and the terrifying arrow intent in the night snow made her face paler and paler. She looked at the lake in the east and suddenly said something very puzzling. "I'm dead." Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaotang had been standing on the other side of the wooden bridge. They were watching the battle on the lake, worried about Ning Ke and Sang Sang, and were silent. Yi Hongyu did not know what the explosion was, but Chun Pippi had seen the small iron kettle experiment, but he did not explain. Just when Yi Hongyu said those 3 words, he looked at the distant arrow and the thunderous fire, and said with a complicated expression, "I'm dead too." They were still standing on the wooden bridge, so naturally they were not dead. But when they heard the explosion and the arrow coming from Yanming Lake, they both said the same thing. "I'm dead." Yi Hongyu was the Tao addict of the West Hill Divine Palace, and Chun Pippi was the youngest grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state in the world. They were the most talented and powerful young people in Haotian Taoism. The reason why they said "I'm dead" was because they were watching the battle in silence. They were sure that if they were in Xiaohu's position, facing Ning Ke's 15 years of painstaking preparation from summer to winter, they would only be able to hold on until this moment and then die. On the snowy city wall, Yi Su said, "I never thought that a cultivator in the see-through state could make such a big noise. It seems that I have underestimated Ning Quebec. But what's with the explosion in the lotus field?" Eldest brother did not speak. As the eldest brother of the academy, he naturally knew what was going on. But like Chun Pippi, he would not tell others about his youngest brother's trump card. Yi Su looked at the direction of Yanming Lake and was silent for a long time. He slowly shook his head and said, "If Ning Ke's methods were used to deal with other cultivators, it would be a deadly weapon. But to kill Xiahou with talismans, arrows, and these strange explosions, it is still not enough." The snow on Yanming Lake gradually stopped, but the snowstorm in the palace continued. Under the night snow, the main hall was brightly lit and silent. Naturally, there were no cicadas chirping. Everyone knew what was happening in Chang, and so everyone inside and outside the main hall had a strange look on their faces. The guards held the cold hilts of their swords and stood guard outside the hall. The eunuchs and palace maids lowered their heads and walked slowly, making sure that when their feet touched the ground, there would be no sound. The Tang Emperor did not wear his regular clothes tonight. Instead, he wore a bright yellow dragon robe. He leaned on the soft couch and read a scroll in his hand, but no one knew if he could focus on it. The Empress sat on the chair beside the couch. Her gentle and elegant face was expressionless today. One could vaguely see worry and anger in the depths of her eyes. The nation master of Tang, Li Qingshan, and the emperor's younger brother, Master Huang Yang, sat opposite each other in front of the couch. Today, many powerhouses gathered in Chang, and so the 2 most powerful and trustworthy sublime people of the imperial court had to be in the palace. The Emperor slowly put down the scroll in his hand and looked at the falling snow outside the hall. He looked in the direction of Yanming Lake in the south and frowned slightly. No one knew what he was thinking about. Although Xiaohou was the Empress' elder brother, from an emotional point of view, His Majesty hoped that Ning Ke could win. Because His Majesty had always regarded himself as a student of the headmaster of academy, then in his eyes, Ning Ke was his younger brother. What a majestic aura! Li Qingshan felt the fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth from Yanming Lake and said, Ning Ke's talisman arrow is really terrifying. The Empress suddenly raised her head and looked at the Emperor. She said in a trembling voice, gathering the wisdom of the Academy's back mountain and the power of the Tang Empire to create such a talisman arrow. Is this fair? The Emperor was silent. He did not want to make his wife more upset. Master Huang Yang, who had been silent, suddenly said calmly, It's fair. It's just that Ning Ke has prepared for a longer time. He has prepared for 15 years. After saying this, he and Li Qingshan left their seats and walked out into the snow outside the hall, leaving the quiet and complicated palace to the Emperor and the Empress. There was a pavilion at the back of the main hall, and an ancient bell hung in the pavilion. There was a thick layer of snow on the eaves of the pavilion, and a light layer of snow on the ancient bell. Li Qingshan and Huang Yang walked into the pavilion and stood beside the ancient bell. Li Qingshan looked to the south and said with a deep frown, It's still not enough. Monk Huang Yang said, I didn't expect that you also hoped that Ning Ke would win. Li Qingshan said, People's emotions are uncontrollable. Although Xiaohou is an elder of our Haotian Taoism, Ning Ke is my senior brother's only successor. Then he said with slight sadness, He has prepared for 15 years, but it's still not enough. Monk Huang Yang reached out his palm and gently wiped the snow on the ancient bell. He said, When Ning Ke entered Talisman Taoism, he once came to the Wanyan Tower to ask me. I also hoped that he could win, but I had my own thoughts. If the one who prepared for a longer time would win, then what's the point of cultivation? The blizzard abruptly stopped, and the airwaves caused by the explosion gradually subsided. The night wind also became much gentler. Yanming Lake was quiet in the middle of the night. The night clouds on the lake gradually parted, revealing a gap. A few stars popped out of the gap and looked curiously at the ground, trying to see what had happened. Most of the night sky was still covered by thick black clouds. The few stars disappeared as soon as they appeared, but some light shone down, making things slightly visible. It was a mess on the ice surface of the snow lake. The withered lotus had long been broken into powder, and dozens of faint black holes appeared in the lotus field. It was chilling to see. A burly man knelt on one knee on the ice in front of those black holes. His clothes were in tatters, and it was unknown if there were dozens or hundreds of pieces of metal. Blood continuously flowed from his body, finally flowing onto the snow on the surface of the lake, dyeing the snow around his knees dark red. The red on the winter night was actually more like black. The place where the burly man knelt was only a few hundred feet away from the south bank of Yanming Lake. Ning Ke stood on the cliff by the lake and stared at the lake. In order to fight and shoot arrows, he wore a black academy uniform. The sleeves and trousers were tied tightly by sangsang with cloth rope. At this moment, his body, especially his right arm, was trembling violently, so the black academy uniform flapped in the lake wind. Using the primordial 13 arrows consumed a lot of physical strength and psyche power. Ning Ke could only shoot a few arrows in the past. Now that he had successfully cultivated the Great Spirit, it was still a great burden for him to shoot all 13 iron arrows in the quiver. In addition to the hundreds of talismans in the lakeside house and the small iron kettle in the mud at the bottom of the lake, he had used all his means. At this moment, the psyche power in his sense of perception was almost exhausted. His eyes were abnormally bright, and his face was abnormally pale and haggard. His right arm was extremely weak, and his right shoulder felt as if it was being torn apart. He was so weak that he could fall at any time. But he did not fall. He waited for Xia Ho to fall first on the lake. Xia Ho knelt on one knee on the snow lake. In the end, he did not manage to block Ning Kei's last primordial 13 arrow. The cold and dark iron arrow directly pierced through his calf bone. If it was an ordinary cultivator who was shot by this iron arrow, his leg would definitely be broken. Xia Ho was not an ordinary cultivator. His leg was not broken, and the iron arrow did not even pierce through his leg. However, this caused him more serious injuries and more pain. Xia Ho reached out his right hand to hold the iron arrow in his calf. He wanted to pull the arrow out, but his hands were trembling so badly that he did not succeed. He added his left hand with a blank expression. His two iron hands suddenly exerted force, and the hard iron arrow was actually broken in the middle. This action would definitely bring great pain. Xia Ho's iron eyebrows twitched violently. His lips, which looked like they were smeared with rouge, opened and let out a shrill howl. The shrill and terrifying howl reverberated on the quiet snow lake. It shook the ice and snow, and even the willows by the shore danced. Xia Ho's knees gradually straightened and he stood up. At this moment, he was covered in blood and looked extremely miserable. However, when he stood on the snow lake, he was extremely domineering, like an indestructible mountain. He was more like the blood flag outside the courtyard on the north shore of Yinming Lake. That blood flag whistled and danced in the cold wind, but it seemed as if it would never fall. Xia Ho looked at the cliff on the south cliff. His pale face was devoid of any expression, and his trembling voice was clearly filled with pain. However, his words were still filled with an insufferably arrogant aura. Ning Kei, is that all? There's more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 481. Is this all you've got? Do you think you can kill me like this? I haven't even used my most powerful move. Don't tell me you can't do it. A shrill howl reverberated across the snow lake. Xia Ho walked towards the southern shore of Yinming Lake in the night. Because of his leg injury, he walked very slowly. His voice trembled a little, but his footsteps were still as steady as ever. His aura was still as strong as ever, unparalleled in the world. Ning Kei, who was standing on the edge of the cliff, looked at Xia Ho, who was walking slowly on the ice surface of the lake. His face was expressionless, but he felt a little strange. He felt the coldness brought by the wind and snow. The primordial 13 arrows in the arrow box had been shot out. The hundreds of fu papers that he had accumulated over the past 2 years had turned into a yellow waterfall and colorful storm in the house on the north bank. The small iron kettles in the mud at the bottom of the lake had all exploded. He seemed to have used his most powerful move, but he still could not kill Xia Ho. He could not even stop Xia Ho from walking slowly toward the south bank. Was this the power of a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts? The snowflakes falling on the city wall had become much sparser. Eldest brother looked in the direction of Yinming Lake. His clean eyes could not hide his worried expression. The old cotton-padded jacket on him trembled slightly, as if it was hesitating to float up. Yi Su's expression was slightly stern. He did not expect that the battle on the winter lake would present such a situation. From the beginning to the present, Xia Ho had been completely restrained and had suffered such heavy injuries. I have to admit that Ning Kei has given me a lot of surprises. The last disciple of the headmaster of academy is indeed not an ordinary person. But it is a pity that he will die tonight. He looked at eldest brother and said, "Unless you make a move." Eldest senior brother understood the meaning of this sentence. Tonight, all the powerhouses in the world had gathered in Chang'an City. Only he and Jun Imo from the academy were here to create a fair environment for Ning Quebec. Jun Imo was responsible for watching the Tang military, while he was responsible for watching the peerless genius of Haotian Taoism. Correspondingly, he and Jun Imo were also being watched by the other party. If he made a move, then Yi Su would definitely make a move. Eldest brother's expression gradually became gentle and calm, as if he had thought of something. Teacher often asks me to learn from junior brother, and I've been thinking about what I should learn. Now that I think about it, it's to learn from his attitude when he's in trouble. He looked in the direction of Yanming Lake and said, "The most admirable thing about youngest brother is himself. He is his own sky and has no limits. When everyone in the world thinks that he can't do it, he can always take another step forward and climb another step on the stone step." He was like this when he entered the academy, when he entered the old academy, and when he climbed the mountain path to the second floor. How could there be an accident tonight? There were many torches lit outside the Yulin Royal Guards barracks, illuminating the surroundings. The snow bridge outside the barracks looked like a jade belt, and the man wearing a tall crown on the snow bridge looked like an immortal on the jade belt. As the wind and snow drifted, time continued to pass. From day to night it was unknown how much time had passed, but the confrontation on the snowy bridge continued. The second brother of the academy, Jun Mo, had been sitting on the snow bridge. The Defender General of the state, Su Shi, and the powerful Yulin Royal Guards had been staying under the snow bridge. General Su Shi leaned against the railing under the snow bridge and looked at second brother, who was sitting cross-legged on the snow bridge. He coughed painfully and said, "Ning Kei's challenge to Xiahou, in my opinion, is a challenge to the dignity of the Tang military, so I want to stop this battle from happening." Second brother slowly raised his head and looked at the leader of the Tang military. The thin snow covering his eyebrows fell, and he said, "Since the battle has begun, there's no need for words." "Yes, there's no need for words." Su Shi raised his eyebrows and looked at second brother angrily. "So you want Ning Kei to die?" Second brother said, "Since the battle has begun, there will be life and death. As soldiers of the Tang Empire, don't you understand this simple truth?" After a short pause, he said coldly, "Moreover, Xiahou is not a great figure. Who dares to say that my youngest brother will definitely lose?" In the eyes of Mr. Second of the Academy, Xiahou, the general of the Tang Empire, was indeed not a terrifying opponent. But now it was Ning Kei who was fighting against Xiahou. Su Shi thought so and then said indifferently, "There are no miracles in the world." Second brother looked at him and said seriously, "The Academy is a place to create miracles. If I can't kill this person after 15 years of preparation, then the rest can only depend on destiny." But the teacher said that there is no destiny in the world. Ning Kei thought so while standing on the cliff. He looked up at the sky and then looked down at the person walking on the snow lake. He slowly raised his eyebrows and asked, "Can we really succeed?" After the arrow box was empty, Sang Sang opened her eyes. She held the big black umbrella and looked at Ning Kei's eyes. She nodded very hard and said, "Because we have to succeed." Ning Kei laughed and thought that was true. No matter whether destiny existed or not, no matter whether he could succeed or not, he had to succeed. Then he should not think about anything else other than success. He looked at the domineering figure on the snow lake and said, "You only have a pair of weak fists and half a broken body. I have a fresh knife, why can't I kill you?" On the snow lake, Xiahou's body slightly paused. In this moment of stagnation, Ning Kei stretched out his right hand and held the hilt in the cold wind. His fingers felt the familiar touch of the velvet grass and suddenly tightened. With a clang, he pulled out the padao from the sheath. Many years ago, Ning Kei had gotten used to carrying 3 knives in order to deal with Xiahou's team of 3 assassins. Later, he no longer needed to deal with those assassins, but only Xiahou himself. So he asked the 6th brother of the academy to combine the 3 knives into one. The knife was long and thin, but extremely heavy. Its lines were smooth but not beautiful. The blade was not shiny, but plain. It was a knife used to kill people. Ning Kei held the knife with one hand and rushed down the cliff. The cliff was very steep. He was getting faster and faster until he was about to turn into a black shadow. The shadow behind the black shadow was the shadow of the knife. For some reason, Ning Ke insisted on not carving talisman lines on the knife. Instead, he kept it as it was, smooth and simple to the extreme. It was probably because he wanted to display the simplest swordsmanship, because he firmly believed that the simplest was the most powerful. Just like when he rushed down the cliff and slashed at the powerful man on the snow lake. He was clearly more than 100 feet away from Xiaohou. But his knife momentum had appeared in advance. It was to rush straight, then sweep, then raise, and finally slash down. That was what Ning Ke was going to do. He knew that Xiaohou could understand what he was going to do. He wanted to know how Xiaohou would take it. If Xiaohou really took it, then he believed that it would be his chance. Xiaohou did not choose to forcefully take Ning Ke's long-prepared strike. He also did not fight back with his iron fists, as he usually did. He also did not deal with the assassins from the Yen Kingdom like he did in the military camp, where he roared like thunder and turned two powerhouses in the see-through state into idiots. This was because he had been injured by Tang. His armor had been broken by the blood cutlass of the Devil's Doctrine. Many of Tang's fists were still hidden in his body. He was not in his peak state. Moreover, he had also been injured by Ning Ke's talisman storm and the attack of arrows and flowers. Xiaohou did not choose to avoid the knife. As a strong man at the peak state of martial arts, he was best at close combat. Why would he be afraid of this simple but powerful knife momentum? He had said before that he had not used his most powerful move. Now he finally moved. He stood on the snow lake and closed his eyes. His bleeding hands reached into the cold night wind. The psyche power in his sense of perception gushed out through the ocean of qi and mountain of snow. It immediately blended into the qi of heaven and earth around Yanming Lake and formed a rope. It traveled several miles in an instant and landed somewhere on the north bank. Outside the courtyard on the north bank of Yanming Lake, there was a blood-colored military flag. That was Xiaohou's flag. The military flag that was slowly fluttering in the night wind seemed to have heard a military order. It suddenly tightened and danced uneasily in front of the courtyard gate, like a monster that wanted to break free from its chains and fight at the front line. Previously, before Xiaohou entered the courtyard, he had inserted the military flag deep into the stone ground, causing several cracks to appear beside the flagpole. At this time, the military flag was fluttering restlessly, the flagpole was shaking non-stop, and the cracks on the ground suddenly became deeper and wider, spreading out in all directions, looking like a spider web. With a cracking sound, the stone ground under the flagpole cracked and gravel flew everywhere. The blood-colored military flag struggled out of the ground and flew towards Yanming Lake. There was a hurricane in front of the courtyard. The blood flag that was torn into pieces by the wind fell down. In the low night clouds above Yanming Lake, there was a terrifying buzzing sound and a black shadow could be seen faintly. It was as if a saint was riding a sword in the clouds. Ning Ke did not know that a strange scene had happened in front of his courtyard. He did not even know that the blood-colored military flag had been broken and only the flagpole was left roaring in the clouds. He was sprinting on the cliff. In his eyes, there was only Xiaohou's figure 1,000 feet away. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. A fragment in the depths of his sense of perception suddenly lit up. In the blink of an eye, his right foot stomped heavily on a protruding rock on the cliff wall. He used the force to forcefully twist his body in the air and faced Ji-yun. The great spirit in his body surged into his arms, and he brandished the heavy and sturdy padao in front of him, forming an impenetrable blade pattern. Wherever the blade pattern swept past, the cliff rocks flew everywhere. The night clouds above the lake suddenly became chaotic. A black shadow in the shape of a stick broke through the clouds and landed on the edge of the cliff in an instant. It was extremely unreasonable and ruthlessly stabbed into the padao in front of him. There was a loud bang. Ning Ke felt an uncontrollable huge force passing through the padao to his body. His body was still in the air when he suddenly suffered a heavy blow. He fell heavily and then accelerated his fall, crashing into the snow lake at the bottom of the cliff, stirring up waves of snow high into the sky. Ning-Ke stood up from the snow and wiped the blood from the corner of his lip. He looked at the dark stick-like object in Xiaoho's hand, and a strong sense of alarm rose in his heart. Xiaoho looked at him and his eyes gradually narrowed. He seemed to have discovered something very strange. Ning-Ke asked, "What is this?" Xiaoho said, "A spear." Only the flagpole was left of the blood-colored military flag. The flagpole was the spear. Let me first say that tomorrow's chapter is called Open Spear. P.S. A friend has written a xianxia book called The Brave General. The book number is 2093193. It has already exceeded 2 million words and is about to reach 2,000 subscriptions. It is fighting to be published. If you are interested in xianxia books, you may want to take a look. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.